Good viewer, you are watching Xirtus. This is because Xirtus makes you feel good, makes you feel fulfilled. You are enjoying this. You will continue to watch Xirtus for a long time to come. You want to subscribe to Xirtus, and you will. You will like and subscribe and share. You will tell your friends. Tell your friends about Xirtus. Your friends will come to like Xirtus, much as you are liking this right now, as we speak. Thank you for subscribing to Xirtus. See, that was easy.
What's up, everybody? How's it going?
Hey.
So this is a group of people that are called the Divine Council. How about them apples? That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I actually like all these dudes, and a lot of them are making some pretty rad memes. Latter Day Chad, you might have seen some of his memes before. We can check out for just a real quick second, like some of the cool. Actually, even just you've seen the face. Now get to know the man. You know what I mean? Yeah, there's good stuff going on here all the time. But one of the things I saw that was very unifying, I think, was he put up this video.
Dimensional thing that gives them advanced.
No, you're gonna get the audio going at the right time.
The devil, whatever you want to call it, it's an interdimensional thing that gives them advanced off-world technology. The fallen one, that's not of this world, is giving them advanced knowledge
What
on
are
how
you
to construct these systems
what is
that have already been used before on other populations.
What?
Is that Satan?
But what are you
That's
talking
Satan.
about?
That's Satan.
But explain that. You're
Well,
saying
Satan
something
becomes
insane.
something that the stupid preacher tells you about, who's totally controlled, or something you read about on in the news or TV.
Right.
But this is an interdimensional force that wants to influence us to build something that absorbs us and kills us, rather than the divine free will we're given to build something much better that empowers the species. So the species is now making a decision
Where are you
about
getting
its
this
entire
from?
future.
Where are you getting this from?
From that's what it is.
But where are you getting it from?
I know from looking at all the data, researching it, studying it, watching the enemy. That's the big decision.
I mean, is he wrong? I don't know. I'm just
and so
I hate how Joe just cuts in there all the time. Oh Lord.
yeah.
Oh, but if he
Explain
didn't,
this meme. My thought process with this meme. It really explains my experience. Just to summarize, like for me, I grew up like with my family being Mormons, and I always thought it was really stupid and boring and lame and really cheesy growing up in Utah. But the more I researched like into conspiracy theories and stuff, the more I started to connect a lot of dots. And there's another video that we weren't able to show because we couldn't find the original clip and there's copyrighted music, where Alex Jones is explaining that the devil is this being who's trapped in the lower dimensions of reality, and he has no physical form, and his entire goal is to get up into the third dimension, the physical world, because that is the gateway towards becoming like God and ascending to higher levels of consciousness. And if you understand anything about LDS theology, we believe in this pre-existence, right? We believe that intelligence and consciousness is eternal, that no spirits are created, and that in the beginning, when Jesus Christ created the world, we were there with Jesus Christ and God the Father in this divine council, and we were there in the war in heaven. And the war in heaven was about God providing us this chance to enter the physical world, to enter the 3D world, and to ascend up in consciousness and become more like him, right? Where Satan, he wanted to take away the power, which was rightfully Jesus Christ as the firstborn spirit, and gain that authority over us and take away our free will, and that war in heaven was this war that was fought over free will between the angels and the sons of God and stuff, where Satan was cast out, where now he has no body, which is why he has to possess the children of Adam and Eve. So you can see how that sort of makes some things click in my head when I'm hearing that.
But also, that's the thing. Like, it makes a lot of sense if you have the symbols. And I realize that a lot of people don't have the symbols, but the symbols are really just so practical to pick up on, especially through like secular culture. Like, I noticed you were finding the Alex clip that you wanted to play, which was pretty sweet, which I should find in the background anyway. It was just an Evangelion clip, essentially, right? Like, that was here. Is this right? Yeah. Let me just put on. No, that's not the right one.
I don't think that's not the right one. The Evangelion one. Sorry, I didn't want Preston to get mad at me for pronouncing things weird again.
Man, if I could find that video, I'd play it in the background just with like the imagery, though.
There is another one that doesn't have as much music. It has more of like a sort of background music. I'll find. Let me check real quick. I can find this real quick, but yeah, you guys can give some commentary while I'm trying to find it.
Well, I was thinking about how technology works and how we're thinking about angels being these giant creations of Archon technology, essentially, that don't have yet the experiences that, like, there's two lifetimes. There's the before existing as a mortal, and there's the after existing as a mortal. And when you go through all that, there's this ascension process that happens from becoming human, essentially. Like, the humanity is actually an essential step in moving on that direction. So a lot of these things are like perfect systems. It reminded me of Tron. You know, you've got these systems that are existing that are programs and daemons that have no idea what else there is except for what they're made to be, and that's what life tends to be. But also, I should introduce people more. Chaz, let's start with you. You want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, no, I'm Chaz. Thanks for that. I'm from Arizona. I'm a convert to the Latter-day Saint faith. Joseph Smith was a very interesting figure for me to come across. I came across him in the junior year of college. I had been studying a lot of Eastern schools, Buddhism, Hinduism, and my grandparents were LDS, but I didn't really know anything about the history or what the beliefs or anything like that was about. But I discovered Jordan Peterson, started to listen to his lectures. He kind of opened me back up to Christ because some of the ideas that I had been presented when I was growing up about Christ seemed to kind of present a lot of moral dilemmas that weren't satisfying. And so that's why I went to the Eastern tradition. So after discovering Jordan Peterson, watching his lectures, I was like, let's see what mythological structures I could find in the Book of Mormon. Picked it up randomly one day, opened to the last chapter, and I said, wow, this is pretty good for a fraud. Read there, kind of pondered, had some stirring in my spirit, but, you know, whatever. Shut the book. Next day, I see two missionaries walking in front of my old Christian private school I used to attend. 120 degrees out, full garb. Never seen any missionaries walking in my town ever before or ever after. They're usually always in a vehicle. I pull over, decide to give them a ride, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to take this as a sign. Let's start thinking about this a little bit more. There's a whole state centered around this ideology. There's a whole institution centered around this ideology. Maybe I should really start giving this a look, see what this is all about, because there seems to be something substantial to it. And you had Lincoln Cannon on here before, and he was one of the pivotal figures for my conversion whenever I stumbled upon the Mormon Transhumanist Project, and understanding that there was some high-level thinkers within this institution and this ideology made me really reconsider my pre-considered axioms of what Joseph Smith was about, what Mormonism was about. And as I studied more and more, their arguments were foolproof. Even if you didn't agree with their mythology, their conclusions seemed to be correct and logical and fit within the scientific worldview I'd come across. And as I started to delve more into reading the Book of Mormon and studying that, along with some mystical interpretations from authors that I had come across, I was converted. I was like, all right, I think Joseph Smith actually had his finger on the pulse of something here. And as you immerse yourself into this worldview and you start understanding where Joseph Smith was coming from, he was a very integrative thinker. Right. He said, let's accept truth no matter its source. We need to roll all truth into one. if all people could, bring whatever truth you have, we'll only add to it. This attitude was very freeing and liberating for me. And he said that God, in the Book of Mormon, he says God speaks to all his children according to their understanding. And so that allowed me the freedom to study all the traditions that I liked. But I've always had this emotional connection with Jesus that I never really understood. There's just something intuitively inside of me that says he got it right. He wasn't insane. He is an actual prototype, and that's what the Mormon doctrine actually teaches. There's something called Lectures on Faith that was taken out, and I think it's key to understanding the whole system is understanding Lectures on Faith. But it says Jesus was a prototype of the saved man, and for us to be saved, we have to accomplish exactly what he was, which was a bodhisattva, a savior, whatever way you want to describe it. That's what we need to become, and that's the ideal that God has for all his children and human family here on earth. So.
Yeah, I like that in a lot of ways. I think obviously people would get really weird if you were to say bodhisattva without like the nuance of like son of God and Godhead, but it's the term bodhisattva, if you actually understand what it really means, it's literally what, a son of God, God restrained to flesh. That is what that concept really comes out to be about. It's not as simple as just a man, or as Docetist as saying here's like Rama or Vishnu, or Jesus is this blue guy or something. The idea that we're able to achieve that is something I think is lost. We've distanced ourselves from that a lot. But also to continue introducing Mercurius Scotus, which is an adorable name. I love it. What's up?
All right. Well, I'm actually one of the members on the Divine Council who is not a Mormon. I'm an Anglican, actually, but
yeah,
but I kind of approach Christianity from like a perspective of Hermeticism and
right.
Christian occultism, mysticism, that kind of thing. And I started like studying like Mormonism whenever I realized, like, I heard about a few of the doctrines and some of the history that isn't really focused on, because a lot of people's perception of it is kind of this South Park caricature of what it is. And that's really my only image of what it was for a long time. But earlier we were talking, and Chad mentioned how there's things like the pre-existence of souls, the plurality of gods, the trying to achieve exaltation, union with the divine. All of these like doctrines that are inherent in the mystery traditions of Western religion kind of find themselves all in like a folksy American package with Joseph Smith. And actually Joseph like starts out as a ceremonial magician, and we talk a lot about that like often. And a lot of the magic that he was doing was based on books like The Magus by Francis Barrett, which is a compendium of Renaissance magic, Christian Kabbalah, things like that. And there was a lot of like rituals and guidelines for angel evocations and stuff like that. And
Right. The Anglicans, aren't the Anglicans associated with King James? Is that correct, or am I mistaken? Does that work
Yes,
that way?
definitely. The King James edition was the the Anglican Bible for.
So the Anglicans are pretty key, I think, to all this. Actually, that's
certainly,
rather
that was the biblical translation they were using, but
King James was as interesting as Joseph Smith, perhaps more in some ways, right? I mean, he was a sorcerer king with a magic ring, and he wrote demonology books as well as putting out the Bible, right? He had his whole.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, because he was like, wrote demonology books and was really interested in like witch hunting. But then he also did things that would now be considered magic in themselves, right? And so that kind of shows like at the time, like, what was considered sorcery, witchcraft, and like natural magic, divine magic was, it wasn't, it was more complex than we imagine. Like the Pope actually had a personal, Hermetic magician who was doing Hermetic, Neoplatonic magic to help him protect against like, political enemies. That was Tommaso Campanella, who was the magician actually. But yeah, like but anyways, like, yeah, just studying this, like you saw that there's this rich mystical tradition, this rich cosmology that really is like in a lot of ways revealing ancient doctrines and ancient traditions that had been forgotten or that were suppressed or were kept on in, you know, esoteric traditions in the West. And
Right.
a lot of that is really exemplified in Joseph Smith. And later on, like, you know, when we get into the details of it, like we might talk about some of the rituals that Joseph was doing when he was younger, because I've actually done some of the scrying rituals that Joseph would have done, like from the same book. And
Wow.
you know, it's interesting to, you know, go and to think that he was operating through on those same guidelines.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, we definitely need to talk about scrying technique. That's pretty sweet. Before I keep going, wait a second. Check this out.
What's up?
Was that me?
That's you, bro. What's up?
How's everyone doing?
We're guiding you to Cola, bro. This is my buddy Draco. He's about to do a podcast that's pretty esoteric itself. I think it's called Hidden Mana, which is pretty good.
Probably. Yeah.
Though, on that topic of what he was just talking about, that does go to a common theme, both historically with when the Book of Mormon takes place, with the Deuteronomist reforms, where the religion was completely reformed in 600 BC, but also the time of Joseph Smith. A common theme we see reflected, and I think we see it today as well, is religion is almost becoming godless in a way. It's becoming atheism with extra steps, where in Joseph Smith's first vision, where Jesus Christ and God the Father appear to him, Jesus tells him, quoting multiple passages from the Bible sort of meshed into one, that they draw close to me with their lips, having a form of godliness, but deny the power thereof, right? And so we can go more in details on this later, but basically before 600 BC, Israel had a completely different religion. This has been proven. It's been proven that certain scriptures from this time period are forged. And on one side, you have the prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah. On the other side, you have the Deuteronomists like King Josiah, King Zedekiah, which they imprisoned Jeremiah. They imprisoned his scribe, right? And this original Israelite religion had a son of God. Jehovah was known as the Son of God until 600 BC, and they believed that he was an atoning Messiah. They had this Day of Atonement. Margaret Barker, who's a Methodist scholar, actually recreated the entirety of First Temple Judaism, and it's stunningly similar to LDS theology, right? And it's much more mystical. That's where you get a lot of the Gnostic ideas, a lot of the Kabbalah ideas. And she seemed to formulate that, yeah, First Temple Judaism is what led to Christianity, not Second Temple Judaism. This idea of the Son of God, the Lord, who is the son of El Elyon, or God Most High, coming down in the flesh as a Messiah, is something that was taught until 600 BC. And most Christians, they should love this. They should love this idea that there was a Son of God in the Old Testament, that it has been removed, that the Dead Sea Scrolls testifies of it and shows passages of Deuteronomy that were not altered. However, because it doesn't fit their cookie cutter mold of what they think Jesus Christ should be, they reject it, right? Much like the Jews rejecting Jesus Christ as the Messiah because he did not fit their mold.
And this is something that like modern scholarship, like modern secular scholars are pointing out, like archaeology and, you know, critical analysis of the text is pointing out, like, you know, and, you know, really elucidating this kind of divine counsel ideology or theology that, that Joseph Smith kind of talked about, like in the King Follett sermon and things like that. Really modern, scholarship is revealing this, before our eyes, and it's really interesting to see.
Yeah, but it's even more. It's even
the question is though, how can anyone believe this whenever there's a magician that's claiming to reveal it? And we were just talking about magical rituals and everything, and so that's the hang up that people have. It's like, so you look in the earliest documents of Joseph Smith's day, he's saying that using dowsing rods was a gift from God, even though sewer companies today still use dowsing rods as an efficient method of finding leaks underground and everything. So I would present that question to you guys: how can we trust uneducated farm boy who was 24 years old, who translated this book, who's claiming to restore this happenstance First Temple Judaism?
I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I have a good response to that, because that's one thing when I was really investigating, before I knew about the Deuteronomist reforms, which is insane evidence for the Book of Mormon, because the Book of Mormon narrative seems to fit this before the Deuteronomist reforms were even discovered. But I sort of struggle with that. It's like, okay, it seems like he was into some mystical stuff, and it sort of prompted me in my head. It's like, if you were going to choose somebody to be a prophet, who would you choose? These godless Christians, essentially, that don't believe any divine gifts, that don't believe that there are angels and mystical beings that can speak to you? Or would you choose to somebody who believes there are spiritual things in the world? There are these things to happen. And we were just talking about this earlier, where as Joseph Smith, because people argue about how much mysticism he believed in before the first vision. You know, some will say, oh, he was just into occult stuff. Some will say, yeah, his family was kind of into it, but not really. But regardless, as it goes along, it seems to be that he goes from sort of these sort of ritualistic type things to more of just a pure manifestation through faith. Right? That it sort of goes into this more godly form. And if you look at the Book of Enoch in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Apocrypha, in the Ethiopian Bible, it talks about how magic is actually a lesser or corrupted form of God's true power that was taught by the Watchers, which many people will say the Watchers were like these fallen angels that came down and had sex with women. There seems to be other narratives that would suggest the Watchers were the Melchizedek priests, right? That these higher level
versus
priests,
the Nephites, exactly, right?
Exactly, that these higher level priests actually had magical knowledge or more mystical knowledge that they taught to women that they had children with, and that this mystical knowledge is what became magic, is what became manifestation. And it's also worth noting, when we're talking about Joseph Smith, I eventually came to the conclusion that he had to be a prophet like he claimed, or he had to have the power of the devil, because there are too many things he did that cannot be explained. Like,
Right. Go ahead. Sorry.
For example, on the topic of the Book of Enoch, there is a passage that is only found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, a version of Enoch, until the 1950s, and there's a specific name of a person and certain events that happen into it. In his Book of Moses that he claims he got from Revelation, that exact person is named, almost exact spelling, the exact same events happen. Even the mention of secret oath-bound combinations, which is throughout the Book of Mormon, these cults that worship the devil and infiltrate governments, it's mentioned in both the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Joseph Smith 1830s Book of Moses.
Right, and then the Nag Hammadi has the Abraham sacrifice attempt, which is an interesting thing. So at very least, he knew so much. Like for this farm boy, he must have been more than just a farm boy. I think we kind of on one level, maybe it's like the super Mason photographic memory boy who got hit in the head and he could just memorize books or something like that. But even that, like you're giving him like this idiot savant credit, and you have to admit, like he's now extraordinary, right? So he's
a hypnotist. He's a genius. He's not educated. He's just a conundrum and a contradiction all in one. Yeah.
But he has to be well connected. If he doesn't have like the ability to median oracle, then like he has access to books that were essentially kept secret by Rosicrucians and the Freemasons and esoteric Hermetic schools, like until 1945, right? When the Nag Hammadi and the Dead Sea Scrolls happened, that's so late in the game that we're admitting it's like a declassification thing. So it is possible that somehow he just knew he had access to secret Gnostic gospel. He had like super expensive first edition cotton codex books that it's somehow, I mean, it's just really, then you're saying that he has money or access to, I mean, how do they have access then to those kinds of books, right?
Well, I'd say like going back to also the other question about like, how can you trust a magician is like, some of these books like weren't, necessarily super hard to find. But also, like some of these things, like the Rosicrucian lore and stuff that he would have been influenced by, that kind of would have been filtered into like the popular imagination through like masonry and popular alchemy and stuff like that. And so he had an idea about some of this stuff. But I think he really was having genuine mystical experiences that he interpreted through the lens of this, kind of these esoteric, this esoteric Christianity and folk magic that he had grown up with. But I think that he was like, and this is also the kind of a thing that is common, with mystics or magicians, is he starts off with this really ritualistic kind of, practice. But as he becomes, a prophet, as he becomes, as this process of, becoming a prophet, you could say, is happening, he moves away from this kind of ritualistic process, at least like, you know, as far as I can tell based on what I've seen in the history. He's moving towards like a more, you know, manifestation, you know, and he's acting more like what you imagine an Old Testament prophet as opposed to a wizard.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of just an interjection, just viewing his history again in my mind. I think it's kind of a mix.
Oh no!
Early
You got censored by the Illuminati. Can you try that again?
Oh yeah! Oh, stop that, Illuminati! I'm on your side. Anyway, no. So it's more. How did you phrase it? There was manifestation and something else.
Like he's acting more in like the vein of like an Old Testament prophet, that you know, as opposed to a wizard doing ritualistic magic.
Yeah, the ritualistic. It is a mixture of both. It started very much manifestation work, discovering ritualistic, and then blending manifestation with ritual that was discovered. Because I think something that might be a little off in some perception of the history is like you guys were mentioning, like, well, how did they have access to these books? You know, money's involved. Well, there's one easy way to answer that is friends. Like, we know Joseph Smith Sr. had friends who were like shamans and guides who could do that kind of stuff. We knew that the Hills, they weren't dumb. Like, Emma knew how to use Datura, and if you know anything about Datura, it can kill you. So if you're going to use it,
but it also says you're part of like Mediterranean witchcraft, you know.
Yeah, Datura specifically, yeah, it could be, but that's more beside the point. Who's to say that they didn't need to have access to the books that have this information in them? Who's not to say that it was had through experience? Because in my experience, for those who don't know me, which is probably most people here, I, born and raised Mormon, left the church 6 years ago, became an atheist, and then I smoked way too much DMT, and I'm almost Mormon again because, like, Joseph Smith is right.
You're like Mickey Mouse escaping from intellectual reserve, and I love you for it.
Yeah.
You see enough fractals, you start to convert back to Mormonism.
Yeah, more than fractals. That's what they'll tell you, in certain spaces, qualia spaces.
Well, I got to do a due service because one of the most respectful Mormons here is sitting here peacefully is ecological, right? Did I say that right?
Illucurgal.
Illucurgal. I like that even better. So tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, Illucurgal, it's Sumerian. It means the light on the mountain. So it stands for, it's an epithet for Zeus, or basically the Jupiter figure. He's the enlightened mountain. And basically I'm coming here. I was a non-Mormon. I was a Mormon for a little while, more just out of, absent-minded curiosity, I guess, wandering from thing to thing. But I've repeatedly found, Mormons are both, outstandingly healthy and educated. And coming to find you guys in your posts, I've just found it interesting how much you guys actually have understood about magic. But for me, myself, my interest lays foremost in the understanding of the evocative side of magic, magic that you can use in your daily life. I've been able to successfully use magic many times. I have done the abyssal. I have done the heavenly. I have, as a child, for those who do know me, some do, some don't. But as a child, I had healed a lot of people. And as an adult, that had become just an absolute obsession of mine. It's understanding why I could do that as a child. I was a part of a sort of Christian faith for my family, but just through study and understanding of the metaphysical, I've been able to reproduce, I'd say like a 1 in 3 chance of a spell working, or, manifestation through personal magnetism of another person. Manifestation, as people call it now, but yeah. So for me, the interest in the metaphysical comes down to, what I can do, what I can touch with my hands. And this has also come to bring me to very fantastic and enlightening spiritual truths that are irrevocable and have changed my life forever. You know, some of the reasoning for bringing me onto this podcast, I'm sure, is from some of my posts. I have an inclination to post a lot of Hindu type posts, or simply like philosophy, psychology type posts. Very little do I actually post about since magical or metaphysical posts, but yeah. So I guess that's how you guys have put me on here, right?
Yeah. I mean, you know, I've seen some of the memes we've been doing, the memes back and forth. What do you think about, like, in terms of practical magic? What do you think about the idea, like, because King James wanted to hunt down and stop a lot of people from, you know, he stopped like women from practicing magic in Scotland and England, and the LDS Church has kind of positioned itself not putting seer stones in the hands of every Boy Scout. In fact, they even stopped making Boy Scouts out of people, right? Which is part and parcel to seer stones, in my opinion. I think they go together. But what do you think about magic in terms of where things are in general? People being told that they, do you feel like people are being told that they should be afraid of the mystical side of things? And what do you think Jesus would say about that?
So I do think of Jesus Christ as being a magician. I believe there's no separation from that truth. Anybody who is waving their hands, making things happen, speaking the vibratory words, different names of gods, whether it's through the mantras in the Vedas or the names of God from biblical Christian religion. These things all amount to magic or sorcery or whatever random name we want to throw at it. Take a magician or a saint or whatever and put them into a society or a tribe that has never encountered these things, and they would call you the same thing. You're a sorcerer. You're a magician. I think ultimately what's happening today about this knowledge becoming common is tragic and kind of, I think it will be catastrophic. I think it's important to understand these things as society progresses towards knowing more about magic, knowing more about occultism, and how these things can be used to destroy other people's lives. I've seen many forums where people are just totally absorbed and basically have the mindset of serial killers and psychopaths, literally killing people they know, even family members. So yeah, I think it's terrifying, but I think we're gonna keep seeing more of it. I think there definitely is a bright side to this. I think that the bad people will destroy themselves, and better people will find themselves at the top. But yeah.
You're muted.
Well, someone just said in the chat, Jesus made miracles, not magic. And that sort of goes back to the book of Enoch, where it's basically saying that these magical rituals, it is the same power which God used to create the universe, which I view it simply as will, pure will, right? And that rituals are a way to convince yourself that something to happen. If you believe it, if you believe that a mountain can move with enough faith, that mountain can move, right? But in certain times, doing a ritualistic thing, that helps people, where I used to be very into sort of new agey manifestation type stuff. And it's because from personal experience, I experienced a lot of synchronicities. I once had, when I was 16 years old, I had a dream where there was somebody that I sort of knew from school, not super well. And I had a dream that they died. And then less than a month later, they died the exact way they died in the dream. They drowned. And it terrified me because I would have these dreams that would come true all the time, like Alex Jones talks about. And I had these dreams that like just sort of showed me the connection that humanity has with the divine.
Yeah,
and
wakes you up.
later, as I like see the evil in the world, I also realize Jesus Christ is real. And this is sort of the one belief that kind of mainstream, at least, combines those two ideas of humanity being one with the divine. We are literally the children of God, so we can command reality with our will like him. And also Jesus Christ is the only begotten Son of God. He's the Savior of us all, right?
Well, like Moses,
Hey.
thinking about Moses, for example, like talking about miracles and magic, remember like in Exodus when Moses has this battle, like it's really like a wizard duel with the Egyptian priest.
Yeah,
And
Right.
and he just whoops them, right? Because
Yeah.
what Moses is doing is effectively, he's also doing magic, but his will, his faith, he has been transformed because he's seen Yahweh and he's spoken with Yahweh. And so he's not like when I do magic, I'll do a circle and a scrying ritual and a mirror, and I have all these implements and words or whatever, that puts you into the mindset. But for example, but when Moses is doing it, he's operating on like a level of pure faith, pure will, because he's been through like this, a mystical, transfiguration of a kind already. And so he's operating just on a totally different level. So yeah, I think miracles.
Okay, so like here's how I look at it. First off, I would say that Moses is probably Akhenaten. Like I'm one of those guys. So if you look up the history and the timeline, you figure out like there's a time in Egypt where there's a pharaoh who's right after the Hyksos have moved in and taken power, and this means that even from just the biblical scenario, Moses, right? That he's Ramses perhaps or Akhenaten, and that he's named this because this is the Egyptian name as well, even though he's talking about his own people's God, because his own people have come to, Kemet by this point. But then when he leaves, he leaves after being raised Egyptian, essentially, right? So the idea that he's somehow very Jewish, like very culturally Jewish, I think is lost because he spent most of his time being Egyptian. He probably, it's possible he spoke the Hebrew language, but it's probable he spoke the Egyptian language better and more in his native tongue because that's what he grew up hearing. So it's unlikely that he would have known the Jewish. It's possible because he didn't Osarseph and Akhenaten, but then you've got the idea that he's using the staff. I mean, he's using the same staff that the Egyptians have. He has a magic wand essentially, and he transforms it into a serpent. And the serpent is representative of their god, right? And of a lot of the things going on in Egypt, he's showing that it's not so much that he's doing it, it's that it's being done through him. And so is this source, everything coming from source, rather than you changing things to bend, which destroys you, right? In the end, I think I agree. It destroys you to do that. But to bend with the universe, like you can surf the wave. Right. I think that's kind of the idea. Like if you can be emptied so much, you can be fulfilled, right? You can have that much energy put into you that you can perform a miracle. And miracles there's a lot of different, I pushed the wrong button. There's a lot of different kinds of miracles. Some of these miracles are as simple as I was saying earlier, if someone sees somebody and says something nice to them, and then that person decides not to kill themselves. You know what I mean? Like little things like that. Those are totally miracles. If you think about a timeline of events and how you can impact people in the butterfly effect of things, you're performing incredible. You're saving lives in these crazy ways that don't seem reasonable or possible, but they're metaphysically and their physics are true. Like we understand how entropy and how society and social engineering works together to make it possible. But it almost always comes back down to doing this thing that we've modeled at very least Yeshua, Jesus, doing. I think it's again interesting. We've got like Jesus Christ as sort of this moniker, but then Christ is more like a company, right? It's like the thing we are co-heirs trying to be, like Christ consciousness idea. And really it's alleviation of karma. It's alleviation of the causation of debt, like of overbearing debt. We are supposed to come to some point of a jubilee of karma so that we don't have the Spinozian effects. We have this divine unmoved mover, but we have constantly been affected by trauma, creating more trauma, and disaster, creating more disaster, suffering, creating more suffering, psychological illness, creating more psychological illness. And this is perpetuating because that's how things work. Actions have equal and opposite reactions. But if we chose to, we could stand against reaction and become actionary, self-actualized. And I think that's the biggest change that we could hope for a species, is that we start making choices based on our own place of reason, instead of from being reactionary all the time. And also through integration, because the idea should be to try to bring us together, bring the truth out from the center. Like theology, theos is shared lens. So this is a shared lens. It's the only way forward. It's strange that we've come to the idea of like a tug of war when it shouldn't be about tug of war. It should be about steel man, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I just kind of, I know this is back a bit, but just going back to the guy's comment, I would like to introduce the idea that for all religions, they are fundamentally, if they're producing a visible and effective miracle, they're producing magic. So I feel like there's nothing but the parsing of language when we define somebody as producing a miracle and producing magic. They're ultimately the same thing. Spells
Magi.
can come by, prayers can come by. Yes, exactly. Yeah, the magi visiting.
The three magi.
Jesus. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And this is clear in Christian tradition.
Is this how magi stereotypically dress?
That's how the
Yeah,
Romans
I love their
imagined
hats.
Are they wearing
Phrygian caps.
Phrygian caps, and then they have, is that cheetah print? Say what you want about the magi. Say what you want.
Tight
but
pants. They look
these-
like Scythians.
These dudes are cool. I'm for them.
Tight pants.
That's
They look
from
like
Ravenna,
Scythians.
I believe. The Ravenna, yeah, the Basilica of San Novi, something like that. It's it's in Ravenna. It's like from the 5th century, 6th century.
The Basilica di San Petronio, maybe.
I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
I mean,
I can't remember. I know it's from Ravenna though.
all magic is, and I think that's what Joseph was kind of trying to. That's why there's so much overlap with Eastern thinking. It's one process. It's one eternal round. It's cyclical. Matter and spirit is of the same substance, just the different ends of the spectrum, and that spectrum's on a circle. And so, whenever we're practicing magic, it's either black magic or white magic. We're either twisting the laws of the fabric of reality, or we're going with that flow. We're going with that way. And Joseph Smith actually changed the scriptures in John. It says, in the beginning was the gospel. And it's my interpretation that gospel is the gospel of eternal progression, the way of ever progressing and learning and expanding. And so whenever it comes to practicing magic, all that is materializing the spirit. And as spiritual beings, we're in the material realm to elevate and exalt all of material creation until it becomes perfected. And so that's one thing that I like about Mormonism is not only does it say that the earth has a spirit, but it says we're supposed to be co-creators with God to exalt the earth to a perfected state wherever it becomes a window into eternity. So I think that's even if you don't believe that in the literal sense, just from a mythological sense, it's quite a beautiful outlook. It's not an escapist. They say, yes, there's cycles of creation and destruction. We need to avoid these pride cycles. The Book of Mormon is all about pride cycles. And it's trying to show us we need to make a people, no matter the case, even if this is literal or metaphysical or just mythological, the goal of all of humanity should be to create a people, one mind, one heart, and no poor among us. And that can only be done through the manifestation of our highest ideals that can only start in our imagination if we bring them forth through direct action. We can't sit on our hands, as the Book of Mormon would put it.
Yeah. On what you said and what a couple people have said, it's interesting because Ward Radio was actually talking about this when they were talking about how the temple endowment is actually found in the Gnostic Gospels and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Prior to the assembly of the Bible, there was actually 2 parts of the gospel. And I think that has to do with how we make sure that these things don't corrupt us. I think that's why there are 2 parts. So there is a gospel of repentance, a gospel of purification, right? Where a lot of the things that are commandments are things that are about willpower. Do not give in to the desires of the flesh, right? I think it has to do with a lot with agency, which is very emphasized throughout the Book of Mormon and the Pearl of Great Price, Doctrine and Covenants. It's a battle of free will against the forces of darkness, right? So I believe that based on what I've been told, what I've heard, so this first gospel, the gospel of repentance and purification, that allows us to do these higher things without the influence of demons and stuff. Because as Alex Jones has said various times, most of the time when a spiritual entity goes out of its way to contact you, it's not one of the good ones, right? You have to be elevated and aligned to get contact with God. But a lot of times it's these demons. It's the devil as an angel of light. It's a deceiver. And you have to be pure enough in your own heart to discern the spirits, right? Where a lot of times the devil will just tell you what you want to hear. And it really does go back to like the interdimensional demons thing that Alex Jones always talks about, how they're taking drugs to pierce through the veil, to see through the veil, which Joseph Smith explicitly taught about the veil. All the temple ceremonies are about going through the veil, right? And that is the second part of the gospel, that elevation, that deification, like the early saints of the Christian church used to say with the proto-Orthodox church, that the Son of God became man so that man might become a god. And that is a traditional Christian belief that is taught in many churches to this day, that deification. And in order to reach that deification, we need the grace of God. We need the atonement of Jesus Christ. Otherwise, we have that risk of evil spirits, right, influencing us, deceiving us. And I think right now, with this spiritual crisis we have, like I said, with the godlessness in society, we naturally understand our spiritual place. We naturally understand that we are connected to the divine, which is where you see all this new age manifestation stuff popping up. You see all sorts of celebrities like discovering themselves. And like Doctrine and Covenants, I believe it's Doctrine and Covenants 123 says that there are many among all sects, all schools, all religions that seek the truth, but they know not where to find it. And that's very deeply profound because it talks about the secret combinations, the devil worshippers, the people that are just wickedly influenced in society that attack the truth of the world, that go against the best interests of humanity, and that these deceivers will keep many people from understanding their purpose in life, understanding their connection with God, that they are children of God. And they seek the truth, but they know not where to find it, right?
Crazy.
And
Looking at the Sephirah, have you looked at in the Kabbalah, right? Let's see if I can find an example that's like reasonable. Basically, you've got knowledge and wisdom on either side under the crown, is what I'm trying to say. Like maybe here, something like this. Okay, so like this is like Kabbalah, which is the prequel to Mormonism, and the sequel is Evangelion, and we need to talk about that at some point because I think the biggest problem right now isn't like a war between the churches. It's just like in Mormonism that some people don't like anime. I think honestly, dude, that not like the biggest problem? I think that's the biggest problem that we have.
I love Kwaku, but I'll debate him on that. Like
I love Kwaku too. But like
I'll
take trans in the church before I lose anime. I want my anime.
I think there's a higher density of anime fans within the church than there is outside the church. They all like Disney or anime. That seems to be, or Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings. That's the big conflict. I think the only one in this group that doesn't like anime is the one person that we haven't introduced yet.
Oh my god, Ptolemy. I tried to introduce you, but I was muted for a second. So now can you like come out of the rafters? And I guess you're kind of in the dark, so I'll leave up a picture of the Kabbalah and Evangelion while you introduce yourself. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so like I'm like the only like non-Mormon here, the one who doesn't have anything to do with Joseph Smith.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, I'm just mainly more of like a Gnostic. I read like a lot of the Nag Hammadi, so and I agree with most of it. Itself. Learned a little bit about like the Cathars too, and I think generally the Gnostics, when you take what they said, that they were more right on things than they were wrong.
Dang, how did you hang with us so long? You must be like super polite. Like usually only a Mormon could sit that long quietly. That's impressive. Well, tell us a bit about Yaldabaoth and yourself. What do you think about the Sophia, Pistis Sophia? What is it about Gnosticism? I mean, is it the gnosis? Is it the knowledge? Is knowledge truth, or is it? What about that wisdom though? Like, why aren't you like a philosopher instead of a Gnostic, for instance?
I would say just because philosophers are too worldly, generally speaking.
These days, yeah, I agree. Most of the most famous philosophers alive aren't philosophers. They're like psychologists, like Jordan Peterson or something. But I think that's a problem with philosophy.
Knowledge versus experience it.
Yeah. What do you, Ptolemy, what do you think about Gnosticism is less, what do you mean less worldly, or what do you think about it?
I think it's more mainly concerned with why the world is the way it is, like ultimately. I think because generally speaking, the reason why Gnosticism can't exactly go away is because the major like religions of the world are like Christianity and Islam, and they posit the belief that the supreme God created the world. But the ultimate question is if this supreme and all-knowing and perfect God created the world, then why is it so imperfect?
Yeah. So since you're a Gnostic, I'm curious to ask, are you also a magician?
I would. So generally speaking, I would say no, just because essentially, and my understanding of magic is it's putting your will, but the problem is that to me that's not exactly the right thing to do. It's not the holy thing to do. You should be. It's a sort of a paradox that it'd be better for you to give up your will and perform the will of God.
Exactly.
The divine imagination, the infinite intelligence. Yeah.
Yeah, something I'd read though was there's a considerable amount of Gnostic texts that talk about magic that were like, one of them is to basically hide yourself from the eyes of what is it? It's the pneumatic, the psychics, and what's
The
the last one?
Hylics.
The Hylics. It hides you from the Hylics, so basically you become invisible. And then there's other ones which protect you from the curses of Yaldabaoth. Others that basically undo like the cords in the body that are created by the demons that Yaldabaoth used to create our bodies. But basically how to basically just subdue those and I don't know, create an
Sounds
improved
like
natural body.
Scientology. Get rid of the Thetans, right?
Get rid of them Thetans, bro. Yeah.
Yeah, dude.
I think we
Well,
found some more Thetans.
Well, also, yeah, in terms of Ptolemy's interest in Gnosticism, I mean, I like to go with the Veda a little bit, Narayana is source kind of vibe. But what do you think is the goal in Gnosticism? Isn't it with the apocalypse of Adam to escape? Isn't it to is your goal to remerge with source? Is it to escape mortality? What is the Gnostic goal and what is your goal?
become
So
pneumatic.
in the Pistis Sophia, the work, generally it's very heavily implied. Well, it's stated that like Christ chose which souls would incarnate as his apostles. So that implies that they're here for a specific reason, and I believe that reason extends to all people that have souls. So generally speaking, I say that my soul, for the reason why, for my current incarnation, is to help like with the transition of the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius.
And in what way how are we supposed to help? How are you supposed to help?
Well, like as we know, like with the world, it's sort of like seeming to be a lot more chaotic and violent, and there's probably going to be like some type of conflict in the future. So basically, like, it's going to be like against like the UN and stuff like that. Like there's going to be like the forces of Satan trying to gain control of the world, and then the forces of light trying to prevent that.
It's interesting because if you think about reincarnation from a Christian perspective, there's the Gilgul Nashamat, which is the Kabbalistic and Hebrew concept. Why did naked people be the wiki really for Kabbalah? Okay, for human bodies has
Wikipedia is owned by the UN.
Yeah, that was just for us. Okay, that was then there's the backside too. That's they're trying to share with us. Anyway, transmigration of souls in Hebrew, in the Jewish religion, people don't talk about this much. That there's reincarnation in the Jewish religion, and that there's a concept of how many lifetimes. And lifetimes are complicated because it could be really short lifetimes, but it might be like full lives that you have to like actually live out 90 times, 613 times, something like that. 90 years for 613 times, whatever. It's something, it works out to like 40 to 60,000 years, right? And it's depending on the ages of people in the Old Testament, it would be much longer back if you were to, calculate. But this is interesting because it's this idea that the entire span of human history, we might, according to Jewish mysticism and maybe even Gnostic Christianity, we might be going through like a system of our souls being part of every lifetime. And if you think about the Mormon idea of like the ancestors and the family thing, that you're part of your family thing and you have to protect your family lineage all the way back. Like if they're not protected, you have to do a ritual to protect their soul with your body in the future. So it's just, I find it really interesting. There's this space-time connection that's focused around your genome and the protection of DNA, which is also, that's also very, you know, it's very Dawkins, right? Like I think that's
I can immediately think of a family mystical example though, because there's a famous story in my family that I put actually in my last book, so anyone can just read it now. And I make an argument as far as like DNA and past lives, and I don't really get into reincarnation and stuff. I have slightly different beliefs on how that maps out. But as far as like, yeah, in a sense, we are who, like people often ask, like with all the wars and stuff going on, like, or looking back to like segregationers and stuff, like, what would I have done back then? And the most common answer is, well, you're doing it now. But I disagree with that. You're doing what your grandparents were doing because you're them. And to round back to the story, and you mentioned that what sparked it is something you said about like protecting them. You have to kind of do a ritual for them, and Mormons do that. We do temple work proxy for the dead. And very famously in my family, there was an endowment session happening in the 50s. My grandparents were there, and it was very delayed. They were just in the chapel forever. And so my grandpa he was there meditating. My grandma went to speak with a friend from her mission that happened to be there too. And a woman sat down next to my grandfather, and they started speaking, and they got into family history and who he was going through the temple with that day. He had done all his family history. He was going through just for a like missionary name, I think they call it. And she pressed him so much on the issue, and the session had been delayed so much that he decided to go up to the office to just see. So he asked, he's like, hey, are there any names under this airship that used to be under airship? And lo and behold, 7 names had, slipped through the cracks at some point, even though he had thought it had been done 10 plus years ago. So he swaps it out for a family name. And he goes to meet the woman. She introduced her name. We have the name on record. It's a family name. The sister that introduced herself, she wasn't there anymore. But the family line that needed the work done was connected. So there was like a deeply ingrained part of that Mormon genome in my family line that needed that like ritual to be done for whatever like intergenerational anxiety to be linked together to be completed because their work hadn't been done, So
intergenerational anxiety is such a better term than unfinished business, because I mean it's so much more specific and relatable. That's exactly what I go through all the time.
I actually was told a very similar story. So I've talked to a lot of people because I get a lot into this idea. I think it's very important of a personal relationship with God, ongoing revelation, personal revelation, that sort of thing. And I've spoken to many people who, with witnesses, claim that they've had divine visitations within the temple, and that stuff for the people that have faith truly does still happen, right? That there are angelic visitations, that you can see these sort of things. And someone told me one time that they were talking where they were doing temple work. They were doing baptisms for the dead or an endowment, which the baptisms for the dead actually something that various Gnostic sects would do. It's in the Bible. 1 Corinthians 15, I believe. I forget what verse. It's 1 Corinthians 15. But back to the point, I don't remember specifically because it's been a while since I heard this story, and I've talked to multiple people about their visions and stuff. But I don't remember if they actually saw a person that nobody else could see, or just heard the voice, which I've at least had the audible voice speak to me before of the Holy Ghost. But that person tells them, I forget the exact conversation, he's doing temple work for a random person, and he had the impression, he's like, I thought that I was supposed to be doing it for a family member. And then the person tells him, I am your family member. And sure enough, he goes home, looks it up on the family history, and that person that he just did the temple work for was his family member that he saw. I'm pretty sure he saw a person that other people couldn't see there. So these angelic visitations and visions, I don't think they just happen for Mormons, but I think that they happen for visionary people like Isaiah and Lehi are described as the first temple Jew type people. I've had people from various sects who are more open-minded, and they tend to have these experiences.
Yeah, I feel like it is happening more commonly with LDS than with a lot of other groups. It might be part of the fact that it has a physical practice that includes fasting and certain kinds of karmic behavior that you're supposed that the things that I remember one time I went to yoga and I asked this guru guy, you know, what do you think about people who are doing yoga to make their butts look better, you know? And I kind of had my own supplied answer that like I'm better than them because I'm doing it for better reasons. I think I wanted a pat on the back, I guess. I'm looking back on it, but he's like, it doesn't matter why they do yoga, you know. It's like why you do it's why you do push-ups. It's why you fast, you know. If you do it, it has physical consequences, and I find that really oppositional to the logic a lot of people have about you have to have this intention. Like the road to hell is paved with good intentions, you know. It's not necessarily always about intention. It's often about practice, and that kind of thing with ritual magic too. There's definitely become and I think especially with Masonic the Masonic staging. There's Masonic staging, there's Jesuit staging. Masonic staging, you go through a physical ritual, and it's kind of, it has its values to it, but I don't know if it's necessarily the same thing as like craft, right? Craft is where you make copper and into bronze with iron. You know, craft is where you use certain chemicals in certain orders to make certain like aerogels. Craft is where you convince thousands of people to react a certain way emotionally because of some sort of spectacle. Like these are specific ordered events that you place. There's intention to them, but people don't need to have the right intent. Like you can think of Edward Bernays and social control, and that's a craft in and of itself. So these are those same kinds of ideas, but when you look at the actual techniques that are being used in order to lower your like, again, I think fasting is probably like a big example. It makes it so many people. How many of you do you know who are, they hear like voices from God, or they see, like you've said, saw someone in the temple who was dead? I think that is happening more commonly, like in this demographic.
Well, it's because. Go ahead.
I agree with that, because the Book of Mormon, it explicitly teaches that you can have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. The promise in the Book of Mormon is that if you read it, you will receive some sort of revelation. Now, the sort of Reformed Protestants will kind of mock and say, "Oh, it's a burning in the bosom." No, I personally, I've had visions of the future come true. I've had a voice in my head that is not my own tell me things just before they happen, and that is the witness that I have. That is how I received the witness of the Book of Mormon. And there is even ideas like the second comforter they talk about, where you can, if someone is truly worthy enough, this is something Joseph Smith talked about that's not widely talked about, usually within the context of the temple, you can actually see Jesus Christ, because the temple is his home. It is the house of Jehovah. Jehovah is Jesus Christ. And if someone is truly worthy and has enough faith, like Moroni, like the Book of Mormon and Doctrine and Covenants promise, then you can see the resurrected Lord, right?
Dude, Starbase
that's
Golub.
something I truly believe.
Yeah, I want to pull up this link that Chaz got because it connects to this a lot. We were talking a bit about the Sephirot and the Tree of Life and knowledge and wisdom on the way to the crown, which, you know, we can talk about the Sephirot more later, but it's interesting that Joseph Smith was so, I mean, again, there are similarities in his work to Kabbalah mysticism, and that's the kind of thing where Kabbalah mysticism is the thing you don't write until you're a 60-year-old rabbi. So, you know what I mean? So already for him to be on the same level that he's making similarities and writing common things to some of the most wise sages in history that are aware of mysticism on the deepest levels because they have access to all of the writings of their rabbis going, and Imams, right? Because a lot of the Kabbalah was in Spain, so they had access to Muslim, Sufi, Gnostic, mirror, all this kind of thing. So, yeah, Chaz, did you want to talk about this a bit?
One of the other patrons actually asked me to share this one. He probably knows a little bit more about it than I do, but in any case, yeah, he was able to synthesize this information. And so not only did he teach that you could see the person of Jesus Christ, but he taught that Christ was the light that enlighteneth all beings' eyes that come into the world. And so he had this, not only can you meet the particular tabernacle that is the representative for all of creation, but that same light that dwells within him is actually the light that dwells within us, the light of consciousness, the Holy Spirit. And this is where these terms start to overlap. But yeah, I think Mark Curious knows a little bit more about the Kabbalah side of things.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, I just want to say, I wish they would use this when they did the Celestial Heaven map. They should have just gone with the original. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. Mercurius, could you actually, that thing from earlier that I mentioned, that was really good, like that you sent me?
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to bring up, because that's actually mentioned in that article that you pulled up, the where it talks about the occult, like the Kabbalah connection. So talking about, Joseph being one of those visionary men, like someone like Isaiah or Jeremiah, so in that article, it actually says Moshe Adel, who is like, a Kabbalist and a historian of Kabbalah, he looked at Joseph's, like, his translation of Genesis, right? And he sees that his translation of Genesis is the same thing that the Zohar is doing, right? Where it's looking at, where it's, elucidating this doctrine of plural gods, of a divine counsel, of one who speaks out, to create the world in their image, and this is
which is literally what Elohim means instead of Eloi. So it's like, how does it? So does now Joseph Smith have knowledge of ancient Hebrew and Sumerian? Like, what's going on with that?
He was studying it at this time.
Yeah, he was studying it. Yeah. But he was coming to these conclusions, that like the Zohar comes to without the, the same level of study that, and he was coming to the same conclusions about, this like Kabbalistic interpretation of Genesis and things like that. And essentially being a visionary person, like this idea of being a visionary man, what Moshe Adel says is that what Joseph does is essentially what we know about First Temple Judaism, First Temple Israelite religion. He recreates this essentially in an American context, and what that is, and it's centered around Jehovah, Yahweh, the Son of the Most High, and like and going into talking about the Josiah reforms and stuff, which Chad could talk a lot more about. He's using these like Kabbalistic methods to unearth like really the primitive understanding of biblical cosmology.
Awesome. Yeah, because the whole thing he was trying to establish was the holy order, and that was the order of the fathers. And so in the lectures on faith, it says the Father is a personage of spirit and glory, and then Jesus, the one who spoke out, is a personage of tabernacle, who descended below all things and raised above all things. And so that's a very Kabbalistic idea as well. So you were talking about earlier about how we need to have a religion where we are able to be self-determinate, but also align that self-will with the truth, right? The highest way and the way that provides for the most amount of opportunities going into the future. And so what pretty much Joseph was putting forth was, as time went on, he was studying all these things like Kabbalism and everything. But the strange thing is it actually makes the Book of Mormon make more sense. So he revealed this from this revelatory state. The Book of Mormon using all these different tools that were claimed to be used. And it was confusing. People say, oh, the Book of Mormon's monalism, oh, it's Trinitarian. But actually, whenever you start to understand, especially in the King Follett discourse, wherever he claims that the Father once had a body, that blows the pages out of everyone's well-known nature of God. But if we understand, whenever the Book of Mormon talks about going out no more, but then you're only having one death, and so there's only one human mortal death in this cycle of creation. And so at the end of time, Christ will harvest all his sparks back into himself and ascend to the status of universal Father, where he will become a first cause, just like the Father before him. And so that's why Jesus says, you will do greater things than me, is because eventually we will become like Christ and become a savior of a creation. We will call out, once creation's called back into Christ, we will be back into that interdimensional realm. Well, we will have the opportunity, because we were prepared with the knowledge that we gain in this mortality, to say, choose me, send me down. I will be a savior of a creation. It's a very Spartan, Valhalla kind of idea. And so the Kabbalistic ideas should be that people claim that it's contradicting, but it's actually enlightening. So why does the Book of Mormon say Jesus is the very eternal Father? Because he was chose to be the Savior, and he was given full authority of a Father, of the holy order of fathers, after his birth or after his resurrection. And so things like that,
Yeah.
once you understand them, it connects all the dots. And First Temple Judaism, that's another huge thing that just makes it so easy to talk that Joseph Smith might actually be legitimate.
The
And
other
also
thing,
Hermeticism as well. Like we talked about the Kabbalah connection, but there's plenty of connections with Hermetic theology and philosophy as well.
Absolutely.
That was kind of the milieu which Joseph would have grown up, this like Rosicrucian, Hermetic, Masonic lore. That was, and Lumen Walters is someone that Joseph was, a friend of the family, like we were talking about earlier.
That's kind of who I referenced earlier.
Yeah. He spent time in Europe, learning hermetics and mesmerism and alchemy and all of that kind of stuff.
So thinking about so there's a couple of things here. The Gnostic thing is interesting because, and where was that picture? Earlier we talked about how they'll have no understanding. And it's interesting how instead of knowledge here, Bina is represented as understanding. So it gives you this kind of clue to the idea that God's not in the image of us. We're in the image of God, right? And this is something that is lost a lot of the time because people will say, well, things must look just like us. It must be exactly like us. This picture, for instance, some will say that this is a picture of God creating man, but his veil is like a brain. A lot of people will say this is a picture of man imagining God in his own image. It's man imagining God in man's image, right? Because those are the mustard seeds that he has to use as reference. The kingdom of heaven isn't really like a mustard seed. It's just the closest thing You've never seen a kingdom of heaven before. You've only seen mustard seeds. So you're going to have to deal with like limited metaphor and reference. So people will see God often as a man, but really we need to go to a further abstraction to understand that all of us are part of God simultaneously. The creation is within the creator, right? So there's something more going on here. And if there are greater degrees of glory, I start to immediately see the tree of life. I immediately see the tree of life as the universal picture, and it's built up on levels of consciousness. And you've got, structure, foundation, you've got glory and victory that accomplish an evolution to make beauty. You have strength and greatness, which thrive. And from this, you reflect and you can have wisdom and understanding, but that's the only way to reach the catcher, the only way to be at the crown. But it's a universal path, and really everyone has to go through it, but we all have to go through it together. That's the other idea of the establishment of Zion, because we have to build Starbase Kolob. We have to basically become a Kardashev civilization. It sounds so much more practical in that way to me, but really it's just working together. It's just working together and trying to alleviate the conditions of karma so that we can get to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, even, right? Have you seen the Maslow's hierarchy of needs idea?
Yeah.
Basically, we have to get to a point where we're no longer worried about the physiological and our own safety and our own love and self, so we can begin self-actualization. I mean, literally, this is the concept from this 19th century socialist utopian religious cult that people are still talking about centuries later, is self-actualization. Can you imagine that this is a thing that exists, that there's actually this happened? I think that's brutal that at that time, in that place, that it's possible that this exists.
The idea of like what is beyond this, like higher degrees of glory and stuff. One idea I have, which is based on something that Kwaku actually talked about on the Word Radio podcast. He was talking, so he had a Norse pagan friend, like on different sides of the country, that they would take these drugs like DMT or whatever it is and communicate with these entities. And he's talking about modalism in the Old Testament. And one thing that stands out is he says that there is a church of Jesus Christ on every planet, on every world that is populated, and that it is essentially an intergalactic military. And that also goes back to this idea where in the Apocrypha there's mentions of Abaddon, which is sort of a higher evil than the devil. And I'm looking at that stuff. And there needs be opposition in all things. That is what 2nd Nephi says, right? 2nd Nephi is all about the duality of all things, how without evil there cannot be good, without darkness there cannot be light, without these things nothing would exist without that duality. And there is forces which act in the universe, which I would say is consciousness, which is intelligence, and then there are forces which do not act, which is, I would say, is more like matter. But in another way, they're sort of one, where spirit is made of a finer substance than matter, as Joseph Smith said. So our consciousness, I see it like when we're elevating the matter upwards, it becomes integrated in our physical form, right? Where we become that sort of oneness within ourselves. But it's pretty interesting, that idea, like, what is, like, if this is a test for something, like, and that there are these higher things, that there is higher levels of opposition, does that mean that there are, like, evil deities, per se? Like, there is one, to us, there is one Lord Jesus Christ and one God the Father, but there are many beings in heaven and in earth that can be called gods. That's what the Apostle Paul says. So it makes you wonder, like, there is a purpose higher than this, and we are the elect, right? The doctrine of election, that we in the pre-existence were born in these latter days when there's the most evil on earth, when there is the New World Order, the globalists, essentially the rise of the Antichrist from Revelations. We were sent to this earth for a specific reason. We are the spirits who fought in the war in heaven, right? When the one that spoke out was there, when Lucifer tried to usurp the throne of God and take away the free will of humanity, we were the spirits that chose God. We are the spirits that chose the Father. And I think that it says something about this nature of reality, where in the Genesis account and in the Joseph Smith translation, if you look at the literal translation, you look at Joseph Smith's translation, God is not just poofing everything into existence. He is forming order from chaos. The world is chaotic and empty and dark, and he is organizing the world. And I think it's in the book of wisdom, Solomon's wisdom, where he says that God did not create the world from nothing. He formed it from unformed matter, right? So we see this sort of chaos of the natural universe. And it makes you wonder, like, that force acting upon the force which is acted, right? Force which acts, force which is acted upon, that duality in all things, right? And again, how did Joseph Smith know this? These new translations are only available now because the creeds of the early church and stuff, they had that dogma where when they're going up against the Gnostics, they came up with creation ex nihilo, creation from nothing. And it's just really
I mean, like,
interesting.
Your idea about evil is really interesting, I think, because like in Kabbalah, evil also is not something like, Augustine, for example, and also Platonism and other things would often define evil as just like, a negation of good, like darkness is like an absence of light or whatever, whereas like instead, whereas certain like Gnostic schools and also like Kabbalah view evil as being like something that has an independent existence. That's like a necessary a part of, the reality. Where in like Kabbalah, like, evil is actually like on a metaphysical level, like the overflowing of Geburah, like of, which is God's like righteous judgment, but the overflowing of Geburah, which isn't, balanced by, what is it? Hesed, I think. Or
well, you even said it. You even said it with balance.
Evil.
Balance itself, the idea of chaos versus order, right? It seems like we've gone to this post-Gnostic period where after Adam and Eve eat the fruit, they're hallucinating and they're thinking in good and evil instead of in consequences. It used to be that you think, if you know all things, and if I do this, this will happen. I do that, that will happen. You do what you want to happen. You don't do what you don't want to happen. It seems pretty simple. After the forbidden fruit, all of a sudden, it seems like they don't understand the consequences of things, and they have to go off good and evil. Draco, what do you think? Oh yeah, chat. Run.
So from what I understand, a more accurate term to the devil was trying to take away our free will is he was trying to take away our accountability. And so that's kind of going along with what you're saying. So what is these interdimensional demons without bodies that Joseph Smith claims that are around, and that's why they are trying to possess our bodies or give our fundamental aspect of our will to give up control to them and have us bound in the chains that they want to bind us in. How do you take away that accountability? well, if we can escape the consequences of our actions, the butterfly effect of our actions, like you were talking about earlier, what if we just upload our consciousness into the computer, into the circuit boards that we have, the size of fission machines or whatever, and then you can live forever, but you don't have to deal with the actual universal consequences that are created or have always eternally existed. And so that's an interesting thing where people have been
a synthetic hell dimension like the Naraka Samsara, right?
Yeah.
So
do you think we should
very
go more in depth on like the secret combinations and lost civilizations in America? Because
I was about when I do that though, I had a plan. I was gonna do this.
Rockwell, protect us from hell in Zion's shadow, where sinners rebel. The destroying angel of Mormondom, his duty never done, always on the run.
You guys know Port
in
Rockwell,
Deseret's domain, justice he planned, old Port.
He's a pretty fascinating character for sure.
Modern day Samson, fearless and clear, enforcing the law with resolute cheer. Old Port Rockwell, his story they tell in the heart of Deseret.
So yeah, I just had a conversation earlier today where someone was a Catholic was trying to tell me that horses didn't exist pre-Columbus in the Book of Mormon times, and I said, just Google it. And I got marked for spam. I'm like, what's going on with this? I can't tell them to Google about horses in pre-Columbian America. So all right, my comment was removed. Let me talk about it again. I wish I could show you the link, removed. I said, you're wrong, removed. All three of those got removed for some strange reason. But yeah, it's new information that's come out that the Book of Mormon, hey, isn't so crazy anymore.
Yeah, well, a hippopotamus means water horse. Anyway,
right.
So there's that. Wait, Draco, I wanted to hear what Draco's going to say about the good and evil consequentialism, and then we'll go to Porter Rockwell and Mesoamerica and the Heartland model. How about that?
I don't know if I necessarily, because that's not really my linguistical wheelhouse, though we were talking about several things that I could probably tie in.
All right.
Because as far as like the tree of life and like what that represents, and God, there was one other thing too. We may have moved too far beyond it.
Never. It's like an orbital. It'll come back.
What's that? It's orbital. Yeah.
It'll all come back.
Yeah. Well, so maybe I'll just speak on the second part, and I'll remember what I was going to start it with. Yeah, orbital. Okay, here we go. So the tree of life, kind of the Kabbalah. Okay, you bring up that picture of the Kabbalah again. I don't know much about that, but I like the image. I can work with it. The one,
but I do love Porter Rockwell. Hold on a second.
Yeah, well, I'm still Porter Rockwell's still on screen. I'm speaking. Look at me.
Really? Oh, he's back. Okay,
there was another one, or maybe this is it, and I just don't see it quite well. But it had like understanding in like the yellow, and then knowledge in the yellow, and then understanding the wisdom.
This
on
guy
the
here.
side.
Yeah, Pokemon Bennett colored at the top.
Okay, so the path that's being followed up here, and then it tied into with what you were saying about the tree of life. So if you've got to the point where you have the beauty, there's also Taoistic things I could bring in there, but I won't complicate it. But if you reach go even further up to judgment and mercy, if you understand, the emotion that connects all that with the beauty, and you can move on up, then you get knowledge. But the thing that's important to distinguish here, and how I think it ties into the tree of life. So scroll all the way up. The top part's all that matters now. So we start gaining knowledge, and I guess one Taoistic principle is the sage learns. The scholar learns something every day. That means they gain knowledge. The sage unlearns something every day. They gain wisdom. So when we go about this emotional fifth level, and we're gaining knowledge, we have to understand we have to comprehend what separates the understanding of knowledge and where wisdom comes from, and where their sources are, how they're computed into life here and there, metaphysically and physically. And why that relates to the tree of life is, you were talking about they had to start working off of good and evil and these concepts of knowledge, this understanding. What was really severed was their wisdom. and how that works, kind of with imagery, allegory, metaphor. When that happened, the tree of life was covered by a flaming sword that went every which way. And when you think about, I have a whole essay, the final chapter of my book, kind of an introduction to this. I'm going to write another one, and I'm kind of giving an introduction to that one just by saying this. I haven't said this anywhere else, but there's a very specific the sea of glass like unto crystal, and how that all that's at the foot of the throne of God. There's one specific interpretation of that, and you can see someone said that Adam and Eve, they went off to have a hallucination. I sometimes say that we're having like a hallucination of like serotonin or dopamine, and then when you take another psychedelic, you're hallucinating that. And sometimes people, they have bad dopamine, so they're in a bad trip of depression. It is sort of a hallucination, and representative of that kind of on a neurological basis is that fire, that flaming sword going back and forth, is the knowledge of neurons going back and forth and making all these connections. And the sea of glass like unto crystal, which is your sphere here, where wisdom pours in, where there's no bounds. When that's connected, you get the crown and the full understanding of that. But when they partook of the fruit and they decided to sever that connection to the crown, neurology came in, DNA, and here we are.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, it's interesting because neurologically, when we find evidence for things that we thought of as myth, but it seems to be epigenetically true, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I like that.
And probably just to cap it off too, we're starting to find too that something like the computational bounds of what we're going through, it equals entropy. The more information we gain, the more knowledge we have, the more chaotic and entropic and things. Yeah.
The less wisdom, it seems. The less understanding. The more data, the less understanding. Because you could have an if-else statement. Let's say you're an AI program and you're saying, is this Afghanistan? Because you're trying to blow up or not blow up Afghanistan. And then it looks at maps and it says, okay, I only know maps. So yeah, this is Afghanistan. But if it knew everything about everything, you're like, is this Afghanistan? Like, well, it could be. It might be a cat. I've seen cats that look just like Afghanistan,
Yeah, I don't know. Don't put Derrida into that program, or maybe just leave them out. I don't know.
It might happen.
So Joseph Smith says that knowledge is required for salvation. So what type of knowledge is he talking about? Is he talking about just data collection, or is he talking about experiential knowledge? The type of knowledge is, when I ask, do you know how to pump your heart? You could say, well, yeah, I know how to pump my heart. When then they could start describing all these data points, the skeleton of the process of what's actually happening, but it's not the actual process itself. And so one of the things that he said is, if you could gaze into the heavens for 5 minutes, you would know more on the subject than you would if you read all the books from Adam to today. And so that's the type of knowledge I think is primary and not entropic. It's actually constructive, because it's allowing you to understand the rules of the game with a higher fidelity.
Yeah, well, that is knowledge through experience that kind of goes through a transcendental thing to become wisdom. It isn't fact-based linguistic things. It's knowledge of God through people.
Application of knowledge.
Exactly. Which isn't what we've written down. I agree with you for sure.
I wanted to pull up this article. Well, go ahead if you want to keep going. Someone say something?
I was curious, how many of you, or I guess I should just open as like a general question. So how do we apply the knowledge that we're speaking of, like beyond just the theoretical, beyond just showing others that the metaphysical can be found within Mormonism or within religion in general? How do we show that we can apply this knowledge? So I'll just leave that open for you guys.
I think that's kind of the funny thing, is just by living the practice, people start to notice, like if you're not drinking all the time, you have more energy. There's really like practical signs of living a lifestyle. And I think that's something that's lost on us, is that a lot of things like the Jewish tradition, there are so many Jews that I know who are essentially atheists, but practice the law, right? They continually eat kosher, they sit Shiva, they're glot, you know, they don't do stuff on Saturdays, which is fun. Why would you do stuff on Saturday if you don't have to do stuff on Saturday? Like, I think there's practicality to just living your life away without any sort of worry necessarily about the deeper levels. And I think that's the cool thing about the Mormonism is that you can get to deeper levels if you want. Like, there's like elect to go to a temple, but not everyone's going to the temple all the time. A lot of people are just part of their community center, feeding each other, keeping their community going, keeping people off of drugs, keeping people like kids going to the pool cube and arcade and the, you know, whatever they're doing with those kids. It's great. Like, honestly, the fact that you hear what Mormons are doing with kids is good compared to other churches. That's pretty sweet. So, I mean, I think that that's a big part of it. People will see it. Like, the Mormons know this. They're always like, you know it from the fruit, right? And they're always saying that. And it's because they're pretty proud of their fruit. And the idea of building family. I mean, the biggest thing I think we need to consider or worry about really is how much we can be plastic with change, because religion can allow you to evolve very quickly, because we can make selective choices about our evolution and we can move forward. But it also can hold us back in certain ways if we are. I think Draco, you just brought up the Tao. We need to follow the Tao of the religion, of the spirit, of love, because everything we're doing, if you're doing it originally, when the first time it happened and it was great, that was out of love. The second time someone tried to do it again, that was out of ritual. And the third time, it doesn't have any love left. It's barely following any sort of justice anymore. It's like, now you're just cutting babies in half because Solomon said tear the baby in half. Like, we can get so far away from the meaning of what was originally happening that it's important to get back on the trail of living the way that they lived before. But we also need to expect that the world's about to change. I mean, we are going to see transhumanist baby that are cloned with 16 different genetic parents spliced together, you know, with bat wings. Hopefully, I want to have a blue kid. I want it to be blue. You know, if I can't be blue, I want my kid to be blue. So in the future is going to be pretty, you know, future shock is coming. And I think that's going to be, you know, how can we handle that? Can we still have something to offer that's timeless? You know, I think so.
Well, I think one of the things about like Mormons in particular, like, and this is coming from someone who isn't one, you know, who's coming from an outside perspective. You know, we talk about this a lot. I think like there's a few things like metaphysically, but also like just in their history that gives them like advantages that a lot of like traditional religions don't have, or especially mainly traditional Western religions and traditional churches don't have, and things like that. And I think like some of those things are like, you know,
Yeah, I'm not
having an
sure
open
why
canon.
I got
and
kicked off for a second.
Are we good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Shake it off.
But yeah, like you know, like having an open canon, things like that, not being bound by, you know, like creeds and things like, you know, a lot of the stuff that you just see like that seems to be like going the way of the past. Like, you know, like you mentioned, following the Tao spiritually. I think you know, you guys do have a spiritual tradition that, you know, makes it a bit easier to do that, as opposed to, you know, the Roman Catholic Church is going to have a lot harder time.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah.
Well, before we go into like the secret combinations, how the Book of Mormon explicitly warns about New World Order and stuff,
and Jewish Cherokees,
because in America,
and
I would
Jewish
like
Cherokees.
to respond. Oh yeah, in a minute. But there is something I'd like to respond to in the chat where a common thing we hear: Joseph Smith was a con artist, right? Stephen Coldwell says that in the chat. Let me share screens real quick.
That'd be kind of cool too, honestly. If he was like the most brilliant con artist, then that's kind of that'd be like Ocean's 11 or something, right? Like, we're pulling off the biggest heist in history. Like,
but he died bankrupt.
Yeah. So in 1833, Joseph Smith made a prophecy. He said that, let me find the exact quote. 40 days shall not fall. 40 days shall not pass, and the stars will fall from heaven. Then exactly 39 days later, on November 13th, 1833, this is a large historical event documented, the largest recorded meteor shower in history happened while the early Mormons were being chased by a mob. They were about to kill them. And then this prophecy comes true. 40 days shall not pass, and the stars will fall from heaven. You can look it up right now. 39 days later, exactly, that meteor shower, it happens and saves their lives, and there are so many documented proofs of it. How did he do that? Okay, he did it through the power of the devil. One of Joseph Smith's first recorded miracles that has proof of it is him casting out a demon, right? I was reading about this the other day. And in the Bible, it explicitly says the Pharisees, who are adhering to their creeds and their dogmas, they accuse Jesus of casting out demons through the power of Beelzebub, through the power of Satan. He says, how can Satan cast out Satan? A house divided against itself cannot stand. If Satan is to establish his kingdom here on earth, he would not go against himself. And so I asked that same thing. The endowment symbols that many people associate with Freemasonry, Joseph Smith repurposed them for the way that they were originally repurposed. How do we know this?
I thought
Because-
that, but apparently those symbols are like even more ancient. Like they were used before the
Yes.
Freemasons by the Judeo Temple. Sorry, keep going. You were going to go there. I'm
Yes,
sure.
they've actually found in first century Christian tombs in Egypt that the endowment symbols are in the exact same place. One on the breast, one right here, one on the stomach, and one on the leg, the exact way Joseph Smith did it. That is an insane coincidence. That is an insane thing of luck, right? He would have had to be an absolute genius. People go back and forth between saying he's a genius con man and that he's a buffoon that didn't know that there weren't horses in America, even though there are horses that we've discovered now
Apparently,
that are
well,
unique
that's
to America.
so. Let's get into that for a second. I think that's really interesting. Oh, by the way, Jesus being a Freemason, Rosicrucian.
Oh yeah,
That's
the
what you
Apostle
get.
Paul
That's
literally
what you get.
talks about like being
That's
a
an
master
Orthodox
builder
icon,
and
isn't
the
it?
mysteries
Yeah.
of God and all this stuff.
You can't
right?
even blame the Catholics for that one, right? Like in the Orthodox, I mean, have you read War and Peace? Like they're not super down with the Freemasons. So, with when we're talking about like the history of America in the 19th century and what they thought about America, they had no idea what they're savages, barely even human. Sorry if I watched too much Disney. That's like anime. But they really, a lot of them thought that these people were subhuman. It's kind of the way people treat AI now. They're like, they aren't even really like us. And all of a sudden, Joseph Smith saying, actually, check this out. They're exactly like you. They're related to you probably. And they had a civilization that was probably better than yours. It was pretty cool looking, I'll wager. And everyone's like, yeah, right. And it took a century. Granted, it took a century. But it's like 1915, 1917. You have people flying over Mesoamerica for the first time seeing Machu Picchu. And they'd never seen Machu Picchu before this. So for 100 years, there's a group of people that are believing what this guy said without any evidence that there's ever been a giant civilization in America. And you got to take that into perspective as well. Because now you look at America and we have lasers and LiDAR and we're finding things in Mesoamerica and the Hopewell Mounds, the Krigler Mounds, the Kresge plates, in Florida right now. I think Florida, like Wayne May in Florida, is very convincing, this idea. And I think I've shown this a million times, but I love it so much. The Western Sea interior map. So if you look back, this used to be believed to be like a bazillion years ago, and now they're like, actually, this probably happened when your grandma was alive. But like 10,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, sometime within the last, before, like there were Neanderthals by the time that this happened. And let's look at this map, because even though it's low res, it has the states, and you can see Utah and you can see Missouri on either side of the Western Sea interior. So I find that really interesting, and even parts of the islands and the lagoons of Florida. So the idea that this whole thing, Louisiana to Florida here, was some kind of, if this was Eden, I wouldn't be surprised if life emerged out of, because we now know, like you said, horses, camels, all sorts of species that crossed back out of the land bridge at some point started in the Western Hemisphere. So why not us? Why not? If camels ended up in Africa, I'm sorry, it's possible. There's plenty of evidence for gene flow to suggest that we came out of the Western Hemisphere and that there's simultaneous gene flow occurring all over the world. I find that really fascinating, and that it connects back to exactly what Joseph Smith was saying and what some of the lore in the next 100 years is about. Because people saying that Missouri was somehow this promised land, but from what we understand, like how would this work? You start in Florida, you leave the Garden of Eden, you keep walking.
Well, I like the theory of United States being the birthplace of humanity. There's actually an ongoing theory that, you know, this is more from the Darwinian evolutionary perspective, but that the first
you got
American
silenced by the
soil
Illuminati
first and drifted out
They do
into
that.
Asia, into Africa, and the other continents.
So look, think about it. You start in Florida, you leave the Garden of Eden, you go north, you end up in Missouri, and then Noah. You've got a flood, you've got this crazy Western Sea interior wave flooding, you've got ice cap melting, whatever is going on, because you got Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson. Cool. So then they get on a boat and then they leave, and we know how the currents work, but the currents have changed a lot, but that leads them all over the world, or east at very least, right? So that's the beginning of that story. I think that's really fascinating to me. And then you've got Babylon happening in Mesopotamia. So Mesoamerica, Mesopotamia, I find that, again, these are things that 100 years ago would have sounded like, oh, well, posh. Where's your evidence? I mean, we have the most evidence that we ever had for that, and we have no evidence for the formerly official narrative. It's no longer the official narrative. That's the craziest part. We're not even arguing anymore. Go to like a school. They're not teaching what they taught you in school anymore. They're teaching this. Chaz looked like you were
Yeah, and something else that's pretty crazy and radical that Joseph Smith was talking. He was talking about the lost tribes of the North, and there's even claims of him talking. Someone asked him, "Where's the lost tribes at?" And supposedly, the claim was, he said, "You know the old cauldron that we used to gather maple syrup? Well, there's kind of like that cauldron up north, and that's where the lost tribes of Israel are. So that's where you start getting into the hollow Earth theory in Antarctica and some of that stuff that seems to be a little bit more believable now with some of the awareness that's coming about of some of the military operations and stuff as well."
It's crazy to think it's just solid underground. That would be that seems like weirder actually than anything else. I'm going to pull up your article you had on the Cherokee. Well, let me also just really quickly show again the meteor shower of 1833, which is really fascinating because there's also the 1811 meteor shower when Joseph is 6 years old. So, that's right when he's coming into cognizance and he sees, the biggest meteor shower in history. And then the second biggest one he predicts. You're like within about a moon, like a month or so. So that's pretty impressive that happens. Okay, Big Chief Rabbi, why Cherokees could be Jews? Yeah, okay, I hear you. Someone in there who's poshing that he might have read the Farmer's Almanac. Show me evidence that they knew that there was a 40-day meteor shower coming. But, could be. Okay, Big Chief Rabbi, why Cherokees could be Jewish?
Yeah, so what this basically goes on, it goes about there are various studies that have shown the average Cherokee Native American, and they're not the only one. There is two specific haplogroups. One of them that I know off the top of my head, haplogroup X, which is found in two places in the globe, the Middle East and on the eastern United States of America, where Joseph Smith said he got the gold plates, right? So the Cherokee, they have a lot of that Hebrew DNA, where it's been said that the average Cherokee Native American has more Hebrew DNA than the average modern American Jew. That is what that study showed. Some people will try and say, oh, they came because there were some Jewish traders that were here or this and that, and they have lots of theories. Some people trace it pre-Columbus, some trace it post-Columbus, but nobody knows why this people have it, right? You can go to Heartland versus Mesoamerica. This is one reason why I definitely believe Heartland. I believe that the United States is a land of liberty, a land of agency set apart by God, right? And that the lost tribes are the Hopewell that came here, the Nephites and the Lamanites, and there's plenty of evidence about this, right? So what it seems to be is that the Hopewell, the same time the Deuteronomist reforms are going, the same time Lehi flees to escape from that persecution of believing in the Messiah, the Hopewells show up around the top of Florida, and then they migrate northward to the Great Lakes, which were much bigger and more like seas back then. And eventually, they're wiped out around 450 AD, which lines up exactly with the Book of Mormon timeline. There have been various Hebrew artifacts found in the Americas. So this super chat said that speculates the same Judaism connection with the Seminites, right? So we do see this thing. I was first made aware of it when I was really investigating religion because people were talking about the DNA in the Americas and talking about the artifacts found. For example, the Bat Creek Stone, which could you pull up a picture of the Bat Creek Stone after this? Bat Creek. Yeah, like Batman. Yeah. Yeah, so the Bat Creek stone, I will tell the story of it essentially. Basically, the Smithsonian themselves, they were digging in a Hopewell mound, and then they uncover this artifact. They can't read it. They think that it's Cherokee writing. They display it in the museum for years. They date it to around the time the Book of Mormon supposedly takes place, right? Until years later, someone comes in there and realizes this is upside down. This is Hebrew. And that writing is an ancient form of Hebrew, not modern Hebrew, closer to Phoenician. And it spells out holiness to the Lord. That was found in America. They then sort of backtrack and be like, oh no, it's a forgery. Oh. I mean, who trusts those guys anyways? But they backtrack, say it's a forgery, and the best explanation they can give to this day is that somebody dug up the artifact before then, put fake Hebrew writing on it, and then put it back in the ground, and they coincidentally found the same artifact. That is so stupid. That is the stupidest explanation ever. Eventually, the Cherokee Native Americans now have bought it, and you know what the Smithsonian did? They made them sign a waiver, essentially, that they are not allowed to display it right side up. They have to display it upside down, and that goes back to the Book of Mormon talking about secret combinations who infiltrate the government, especially in the last days. It warns of that explicitly. There are some artifacts found in the Americas that you can argue are fake. I've seen evidence, some of them is greater than others, of Egyptian and Hebrew artifacts, which are the two languages the Book of Mormon says they wrote in, Egyptian and Hebrew, because they were from the tribe of Joseph. They were Ephraim and Manasseh. They're the fulfillment of the prophecy of the stick of Joseph and the stick of Judah from Ezekiel 37, right? So we see these artifacts, and that one, the Bat Creek stone, 100% real. The cover story for it is so stupid because they already confirmed it was real and had it in a museum for years until they realized it was Hebrew. Their explanation, there were no Israelite artifacts there. There was no Israelite civilization. It's so coping. It is so coping. And it's right near the group of Native Americans.
Which group is this Hebrew group though? Are you saying it's a specific group that we should be looking at? Is it the Navajo that we were sharing, or the Cherokee? Or
I think a lot of the Native Americans do, but there's several groups. The Cherokee are really interesting because a lot of people have postulated from their linguistic connection, because they have a really fascinating language that's connected to a Greco-Arabic language, and Arabic and Hebrew. You have to understand how much Hebrew's changed since the 19th century, because it was basically a dead language for a long time. So much of it was really, the Jews were writing in Arabic in Spain, and so much of their understanding you have Aramaic. Hebrew was becoming more and more of a dead language even at the time of Jesus. It was used in the temple. So the fact that people are like, oh, well, they only have some similarity. It's such a subtle similarity to Hebrew. Yeah, but then look more deeply into the Greco-Jewish, the Hellenistic Jews and what they were speaking, and also look into their writing, and you start to see huge connections. And similarly, the Croatoans along the coast, there's a lot of evidence from the Mediterranean. It just seems like the Mediterranean was interacting. But from what people like to think about the Mediterranean, they're like, wait, that doesn't make any sense, because some of these people, they look olive skinned, or I mean, we kind of know now, but there's Berbers and there's different kinds of people, and it's interesting how there are blonde Berbers, there are black-haired Italians. There's a fusion, obviously, because this was a place where there's a lot of cultural exchange going on, and it's hard for people to understand that today we have this cappuccino economy, and before the plague and this collapse of civilization, we had a cappuccino economy and people interacting. But yeah, we've gone through some periods of nationalistic isolism, and it's crazy because Europe is so new. I mean, most countries in Europe are younger than the United States. Germany's a new country. These are all brand new ideas. They're not the old Austro-Hungarian Empire. They're not, it's a brand new thing, but they're thinking that that's legitimate history. That's the real. There's no way that these and that could have been connected. It blows my mind, right?
Yeah.
The Jewish and the Cherokee connection is really also interesting because some of the mythology and just the idea of how chiefs work, that you're a spiritual master and you're supposed to keep the history of the tribe. I mean, there's a lot of connections I wouldn't say that everything is the same, but that's also interesting because you were talking about the secret combinations. I know Dan Vogel's made videos about this, and it's interesting the idea of Freemasonry today because we think of it as a secret combination. But what do you think they mean when they talk about the secret combinations in the collapsing civilization?
Well,
Because it's supposed to be, yeah.
Yeah, let me pull up the Book of Mormon right now on my phone. Ether 8, all right? If any of you watching, I don't care if you're Mormon or whatever, read Ether chapter 8. I'd say read the entire book of Ether. It's not super long in the Book
Bro,
of Mormon.
how cool is a book that literally has a book called Ether? I know it's spelled differently, but just let me go with it because it's so sweet.
Yeah.
Ether, bro.
So anyways, within the context of the Book of Mormon, they are a lost tribe. Like I said, they're family from the tribe of Joseph who comes to America. There was another group that came here earlier that was wiped out, and they are reading their records, warning of the same contentions that are happening. So if you will scroll down to verses 23 to 25.
23 is a
right?
good number.
So I will read. So throughout the Book of Mormon, starting at 2nd Nephi, the second book in it, it starts warning of secret combinations. At times, they're described as a cult who literally worships the devil and does terrible, unspeakable things that they write. Or it's like, we don't want you to repeat these rituals, so I'm not going to leave this in the record, right? Murderous, cannibalistic, Epstein Island type stuff, right? And other times it's portrayed as just people who murder for gain and for power in the government, but it's like organized crime in a way. You've got the Gadianton robbers. So starting at verse 23, wherefore, O ye Gentiles, it is wisdom in God that these things should be shown unto you, that thereby ye may repent of your sins, and suffer not that these murderous combinations shall get above you, which are built up to get power and gain. And the work, yea, even the work of destruction come upon you. Yea, even the sword of justice, the eternal God shall fall upon you, to overthrow your overthrow and destruction, if ye shall suffer these things to be. Wherefore, this is where you want to pay attention. Wherefore, the Lord commandeth you, that when ye shall see these things come among you, that ye shall awake to your sense of your awful situation, because of this secret combination which shall be among you. Or woe be unto it, because of the blood of them who have been slain. For they cry from the dust for vengeance upon it, and also upon those who built it up. For it cometh to pass that whosoever buildeth it up seeketh to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries, and it bringeth to pass the destruction of all people. For it is built up by the devil, who is the father of all lies, even the same liar who beguiled our first parents, yea, even the same liar who has caused man to commit murder from the beginning. Who hath hardened the hearts of men, and they have murdered the prophets, and stoned them, and cast them out from the beginning. So the context of this, Moroni, he's the one transcribing the book of Ether. He's transcribing the record of the Jaredites. And he's seen these secret combinations destroy his society, these people infiltrating the government, these cults infiltrating the government for power, for gain. And he is a prophet, and he is seeing the future. Everything he's transcribing in the plates is something relevant to us. And when he looks upon the latter days, he sees a secret combination, like the ones of old, that seeks to overthrow the liberty of all nations, and he repeatedly warns about it. Right? The prophet of the church earlier from the 1980s, he's well respected, even among people who don't necessarily align with the church's current status. Ezra Taft Benson, he specifically talks about these neo-Marxist organizations. He talks about Marxism being that same ideology that Lucifer had in the pre-existence, that guaranteeing the equality of outcome regardless of your choices. That is the ideology of Satan from the pre-existence, and that is the continuation of that war in heaven. And he warns that these Marxists will infiltrate our society, will infiltrate our institutions, will over-sexualize things, will try to destroy our country from within. And that is the secret combinations which we are warned about in the latter days. And we see all the occult connections with the globalists. We see on the CIA website, it literally talks about demonic possession. It literally talks about consciousness ascension. It's all on the CIA website. You can see it all. It's public information because they believe in karmic retribution. They believe that if they tell you what their plans are, it's okay. And you see these plans, these secret combination from the Book of Mormon that warns about, it is the beast of Revelations. You should read the Book of Mormon in side by side with Revelations and understand that many of the prophecies are connected about the latter days, right? The secret combinations, it is something that is so emphasized throughout not just the Book of Mormon, but the Book of Moses as well. It talks about how Cain Cain and Abel. He was the first person to form a secret oath-bound combination with the devil, right? And on my Instagram page, there's actually a video where Tucker Carlson, he is talking about like these interdimensional demon things that Alex Jones and those guys have talked about for years. And he's talking about how he's seen all this stuff, how he's seen the files. And he's like, I don't think these are aliens. I think these are demons. I think that they've always been here. And I think that people in our government have made promises with them, have made deals with them. And that's exactly what the Book of Mormon describes with these secret oath-bound combinations, right? So we see these prophecies coming true, and it is the only scripture in the world that explicitly warns about it. There are some verses like Ephesians 6:12 in the Bible does sort of correlate the princes of darkness and the demons with the government, which was actually removed in the King James Version of the Bible. But in the Geneva Bible and in older versions of the Bible, that is there. And I think that when we see these things, like, so we see these lost civilizations in America. Tucker Carlson, again, talking about this, a friend of mine, Ancient Answers, if you can, I'll put the link in the chat to his Instagram. He does a lot of videos about that stuff, right? Where he talks about the lost civilizations in America. He talks about there's literally been swords and armor. They're in museums in Ohio right now, where there are swords and armor that literally have in ancient Hebrew, ancient cuneiform-like Hebrew, Yad-He Vah-He, which is Jehovah in Hebrew. And these things aren't taught about publicly. You see Tucker Carlson talking about like that guy, he is so good. Tucker Carlson accepts the Book of Mormon. That stuff is amazing. This guy's great. And so you see this stuff. It's like Tucker Carlson at the end of that thing, when he's talking about the lost civilizations in America and how there have been massive population centers. There are stone buildings, there are stone ruins in Tennessee. There are these mounds. He's like, why are they not doing that? Why are they not talking about this? It's evil. It's satanic. And I know Ancient Answers. Ward Radios watch his video on there. I don't think that he would get mad if you just played it right there or copyright it. I actually have that same video posted on my Instagram, and he said it was fine. So you can even show this right now if you like unmute it or whatever, because I think that would be a great thing to explain it.
Let me try to share that video with the audio. Okay, hold on.
I will say, however, I've done some reading recently on topics that not forbidden or racial or religious, pure history. Like, what do we know about ancient civilizations? And the answer is like basically nothing. No. And the idea
Tartaria, did you read about Tartaria?
No.
Oh,
so I'm
that's my girl.
It's like all new to me. I'll just start with the one thing that we do know, which is what we don't know, which is how the pyramids are built. And I don't understand how we could send men to the moon, but no one can come up with even a rough theory for how the pyramids are built.
It's so adorable.
Or even what age they are, because we don't know that either, actually.
And they're under the water, too.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's pyramids under the water.
But
Dude,
why?
It's Roseanne Pill right now.
Why is there such institutional resistance to acknowledging that we don't know certain things? Here in North America, there are certain archaeological ruins, say in the state of Missouri, they were not built by the descendants of the current American Indians. We know that. That are, one of them's a mile long. Yeah. A mile long. In Missouri now. Yeah. It's almost nothing. Like, I've never learned any of this in school. It's all totally real. Look it up. It's on Wikipedia, which is the most CIA-controlled information source in the world.
What does it look like?
It's a mound. It's a tell, but 50 feet high or something. I'm guessing.
Oh, they're finding stuff all over. We have Jimmy Corsetti coming on. You find stuff all over.
So there's a overwhelming evidence. Well, there's proof that there were massive population centers in North America long before 1492. So what
deal with
all I'm saying, the only thing we know
for
certain,
the Mormons have the Book of Mormon. They say that was the history of those people.
The 10 lost tribes of Israel came to the United States,
across
and
the Bering
I've
Strait.
certainly spent a lot of my life making fun of that, but I'm going to stop.
Yeah, but who knows what?
Well, that's exactly right.
But I think that somebody or some group of somebody's, they know how stuff works and they got it all.
But why is no one interested in it? I don't understand why this isn't like the most.
No, people are interested, but there's no way they can find it because.
But if you're NBC News, like, why don't you do this like a nightly segment on
they know not
mysteries of history? Because they're.
Can I ask a question real quick to you? Is it within the realm of possibility that this movement that we're fighting now is actually satanic?
What do you mean in the realm of possibility?
Well, exactly.
What's not satanic is like Sicilian mafia.
Right.
You know, they pimp out women, they loan shark, they sell heroin, but they do it because they want to get a bigger house in Far Rockaway. I get it.
It's money. It
It's
makes
money.
sense.
It's totally.
Yeah.
It's a commercial transaction. It hurts people. It's bad. It's illegal, but it's explicable.
Right.
I understand that.
Yes.
You know, what we're seeing now is not explicable. It's not. Why would he billionaire? You know, you have $1 billion. You can't spend it all.
Right.
It's much deeper than that.
You got to keep
And
other people
why would
from
you
having it.
hate things that are true that don't affect you?
Right.
You
They do
can't
affect you.
stand to hear something that's just objectively true.
Which means
What is that?
you're evil.
The hatred of truth is the hallmark of darkness.
Yes,
Obviously,
it is absolutely.
Oh, that's adorable. Good job,
Right.
Roseanne. I think part of that though, like, is it's that he's thinking, or for a lot of people, Roseanne's talking about there's people that are stuck because of that Maslow hierarchy of needs. There's people that are like, I gotta feed my kids. I can't focus on whether or not the Jews came to America. I'm sorry, but I get those kind of people because they're forced into it because they're not able to take care of themselves. I think that's on purpose. But the other thing he's missing, you know, and it's that humans are. He's missing that the elite are affected by it. There are some people that are just emotionally charged because of the mind control, and we're dealing with most of them on the front lines of the battle. But the people that are really seeding that kind of psychological operation, they're aware that these definitions matter and that truth matters. That's why they're so offended, because it really is a big deal to destroy truth. On a fundamental level, if you can destroy truth, then you can force change. People's choices are based on the information they make. If everyone's making choices based on the information you give them, you have so much more power than money, right? And you can end the species, you can change the species, you can end the world, you could have the world. You know, what's the point of being evil if you can't do it completely sustainably? I think that's also what's happening. But
yeah, and I think like we know Joseph Smith, like it was Mercurius. I know your real name, but I don't know your new username there. But you were saying, I remember when I was going over this Hebrew DNA stuff and how you acknowledge that the Mormon hierarchy, because it's not like a polytheism, it's like a monarchism where there are these levels of intelligence with God Most High at the top, where it matches up perfectly with First Temple Judaism. So it's this religion that recreates this First Temple Judaism. It talks about these secret combinations and that there are these Hebrews in America. And then we find that there are institutions who, because it goes against their narrative, whether on purpose or not, they cover up these things in often ridiculous ways, like with the Bat Creek Stone. It's so suspicious. It's like, so there's evidence for this book that talks about secret combinations, and the evidence is being covered up by a secret combination.
The thing about secret combinations, and you know, you mentioned like the narrative, you mentioned it earlier. You talk about when Leon and his family flee in the narrative, it's like supposedly happens around the time when the Deuteronomist reforms take place. And so we know from like history that that is a government, you know, program of religious reform and centralization, or, you know, around the First Temple. Whereas before that, you know, there's, you know, a different kind of theology and a different kind of religious practice. Like, and then it's shifted away from that towards a centralized focus with the king and the temple in Jerusalem. And accompanying this is this new text that they bring out, which is, you know, what we know is like the Deuteronomistic text and things like that. And which supports this new, you know, ideology. And that's one of the things I've been like wanting you to talk about. Like I've excited for you to explain more, because that really is sort of like the beginning of, you know, I guess like altering scriptures, covering things up, you know what I'm saying? Like
right.
That kind of theme, that's like the first time it really happens. And so I think if we can like kind of deconstruct that historical event and its consequences, we can really like free Christianity from its reliance on, you know, creeds and dogmas and the canon. You know, we can have this kind of, you know, a religion that's like, or a spirituality that is prepared for the future. And so, yeah, I think it's like maybe that's like the first, you know, secret combination, or not me. Yeah, in terms of like the biblical narrative.
I agree. My personal opinion. So there's a guy I like to watch. He isn't really as esoteric, but he does talk a lot about the Deuteronomist reforms. He's called Quick Media, CWIC Media. Greg Mattson. He does great videos on it and can go more in depth than me. But he does do another video where he believes the great and abominable church, which is the whore of Babylon from Revelations, is this sort of Marxist ideology reemerging. I believe that that ideology is the secret combinations emerging time and time again. That guy, Quick Media. Go ahead and watch him if you want to learn more about the Deuteronomist reforms. But what I can say is that there are scriptures that have been proven to be forged from that time period. The Book of Kings, the Book of Second Kings, the Book of Deuteronomy is at least partially a forgery, and we know that because it matches up with what's historically going on then. It has nothing to do with the other books of Moses. And they found a portion of the Book of Deuteronomy, 32:8. If you can pull up on the screen, look up for Yahweh, son of El. It will say that until 600 BC, when they found this older version of Deuteronomy in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Yahweh was the son of El Most High. In Deuteronomy 32:8, it lists Jehovah or Yahweh as one of the sons of El Most High. Right? So we have this. So Yahweh and El, and I think personally, I used to think that Baal was Satan, but looking at the Canaanite religion, I think that the Canaanite religion was an apostate version of this Judaism religion, because Baal is a name that means Lord, right? And then Baal, the Lord, was a son of this god, this father god named Dagon. And then Dagon and El kind of get conflated together, and Baal becomes one of the sons of El historically. So I think that it was a corrupted pagan form of the true religion, and that Yahweh is the Son of God. Yahweh is Jesus Christ. You can look up all this stuff. Most scholars agree that, for example, Psalms 82:6, when it says, "Ye are gods," the famous thing, is talking about Yahweh being appointed by El as the judge of the divine council. And you want to take note, because when Jesus Christ cites that scripture, he uses it to refer to humanity. They say, "You being a man, you can't be God." And he says, "Is it not written in your own scriptures that ye are gods and all of you are children of the Most High?" Right? So he's citing that same divine council scripture, which is sort of conflating humanity with the divine council, which goes
Dude,
back
is
to
this
the
Jesus
pre-existence.
as the Silver Surfer? That's amazing. I've never.
But if you could, so Jeremiah 8:8, I'll read it right now. The King James version, let me find it. I can't find it. Actually, so Jeremiah, some of his scriptures that seem to agree with the reforms going on in Jerusalem at that time, basically removing Jehovah as the Son of God, throwing the brass serpent, which represents Jesus Christ, out of the temple, throwing the tree of life, which Lehi in the Book of Mormon sees, out of the temple. Jeremiah was jailed by the kingdom at the time who was doing this. And he says, "How do ye say we are wise, and the law of the Lord is with us?" The law of the Lord refers to these Deuteronomist reforms. The law, the book of the law, that's what King Josiah finds in the temple, supposedly. "Lo, certainly in vain made it. The pen of scribes is in vain." That's what one version says. But more specifically, other versions, it says, "But behold, the lying pen of the scribes has made it into a lie." That is ESV version, right? King James isn't as perfect as people think, but it specifically talks about the different translations, that there are scribes who are forging and altering scriptures, which lines up with what we find. We know that that the prophet Isaiah and Jeremiah, they are opposed to the kingdom. I'm going to butcher this name because I don't know how it's pronounced, but it's Baruch, Baruch or something. That was the scribe of Jeremiah. In his apocryphal books, he was cast out of the kingdom for preaching about the Messiah, for preaching about this atoning Messiah. He was cast out, a contemporary of Lehi and Jeremiah. And these are all things that we're finding out now within the last 30 years or so, that these changes happened. Now, in the Book of Mormon, it very much seems to fit that narrative where Lehi, he knows who Jesus Christ is. He knows that the God of Israel, who is the Son of God Most High, will come down among the children of men and will atone for the sins of the world, right? And he is mocked as a visionary man, a term which is used in certain translations to refer to the followers of Isaiah. They still believe in this personal God. They believe in temple visions. They believe that they can go to the temple and see these visions. And that's something that the Book of Mormon hammers on over and over, that if you want to know something, you can ask God for yourself. You can get personal revelation, right? So we find all this stuff. We find the scriptures being forged. And I also think that this lines up with the Gnostic idea of Yahweh being evil, because the Deuteronomists are sort of forming God in their own image, right? They're forming Jehovah, who is Jesus Christ, the creator of the world, into their own image, right? Into basically to give their political group power, right? So Lehi, he escapes during this time period to preserve, and I quote, plain and precious things, right? There are so many scriptures that we can verify were forged during that time period. And it gives insane evidence to Jesus Christ if we consider, hold up, this original religion believed that there was a son of God who was going to atone for our sins. And this was way before Jesus Christ. But
Right.
a lot of
But then-
people, they won't accept that.
But it's
'cause
such a
not
Krishnamurti, but it's such a Krishnamurti thing, right? Because you got like Helena Blavatsky's whole like, let's make Krishnamurti into our little Antichrist, and you got this, let's make Jesus into our little blood sacrifice boy. You know, he's gonna do all this like Anakin Skywalker atonement. But what does Jesus really say he's gonna do? You know, he's going to forgive debts. It's not about his death. He's already done it just by being here and living his life. I think that's a huge thing that we have to start looking at as well. Is the life of Jesus is underrated, and the death of Jesus is overglorified to an
So
extent.
that's something that's interesting within the Mormon context, is because the emphasis is actually in the garden. So there's something mystical that happened in the garden, and Joseph Smith said that he bled from every pore whenever the apostles were having a hard time staying awake. There's some strange thing happening, and from our perspective, from what I've elucidated, even from the mythological perspective, if you don't believe this actually happened, just from a mythological perspective, consider this being who was chosen from the beginning of time to be the trailblazer, to show the Tao the way to progression, to eternal lives without end. He had to experience the consequences of sin from Adam to the last man that will be on this earth or in this sphere. And so he had to experience not only the executioner side of sin, but he also had to experience every one of us, because his light is our light. So he's experienced all the consequences of sin, and he took that on himself and carried it to the cross. And then in his death on the cross, he forgave it and relinquished it. Like you were saying, the cross was the ultimate symbol of forgiveness. If you believe the idea is very important, and because we're being cleansed by his blood, there's all this mystical imagery that you could put by it. But yeah, that's why you don't see the cross in the church, is because we as Latter-day Saints say that we want to focus more on the life of Christ. I don't have anything against the cross. I think the cross is actually quite beautiful. But
yeah,
that
if
was,
they had him surfing like the Silver Surfer on a space cross, that would be a good compromise. But otherwise,
I mean, I still wear a cross. I have it with my anointing oil for
Oh, yeah?
blessing people right here in my neck.
oh,
But
I have a little bit on Thursday.
wow, what do you know?
But
Never seen
But I
that.
do think it's quite interesting because, like we were saying earlier, that Kabbalist guy, he comes to the conclusion, researching Joseph Smith, this guy somehow recreated First Temple Judaism. And then we have entirely separate groups of people coming to that same conclusion. Margaret Barker, the Methodist scholar who went over what she calls temple theology, and then all the atheists and the Mormons locked onto it because all the creedal Christians are like, oh no, we don't like that. That's too, that's blasphemous or whatever, right? The atheists latch onto it because they're like, oh, we can disprove Christianity. And the Mormons are like, this is exactly what we believe. So she talks to the Mormons. She analyzes this stuff.
Nice.
Right? And she comes to the same conclusion that Joseph Smith's theology is almost identical to First Temple Judaism. If you look up Margaret Barker's Wikipedia page right now, Margaret Barker, and go to the section on temple theology, right? So scroll down, temple theology. If you read through that, that is almost identical to our temple rituals, that it starts in the Garden of Eden, right? And that the Lord, Yahweh, God of Israel, was the Son of God Most High. Jesus from the very beginning was recognized as the Lord in this sense. So she's explaining that Christianity does not come from Second Temple Judaism. It comes from that First Temple Judaism, which the Deuteronomists, who ended up being the ancestors of the Pharisees that reject Jesus Christ, that is the true religion of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, this is
right?
hard, I think, because I wish people could. I want to emphasize this point in a way for people to actually get it, but it's so crazy that the earliest temple rituals, and these rituals are older than a lot of these Egyptian rituals or some of these Canaanite rituals, that these rituals are essentially the same structure as what's going on in 2023 in a lot of the temples. I mean, it's I don't want to give you too many specifics, but just
Yeah,
reading
like
this, if I were to read this to you, you'd be getting the specifics.
yeah, exactly. Like literally just the idea of like, we're not supposed to reveal the secret things or whatever, but just the specifics that it has to do with the fall of humanity, going through the Garden of Eden, progressing,
Right.
and then achieving theosis, deification, becoming one with God, becoming divine, becoming an angel or a lesser God than the Father, which is exactly what's listed there through Jesus Christ, through Yahweh or Jehovah's atonement. And in the temple, Jesus Christ is specifically referred to as Jehovah, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost identical. And so we have multiple people from different religions that are not Mormons saying, hold on, this Mormon guy literally recreated this original Judaism religion, which Christianity was likely based on. And so I see, because we believe in this great apostasy that happened at the beginning of the Christian church, I see like the Gnostics taking some of the more mystic sides of the gospel, like how I said there's the gospel of repentance and then the gospel of theosis or becoming like God, and that it's different levels. I see like the mainstream Christians taking that gospel of repentance, but not taking it further, except maybe in like Eastern Orthodox traditions where they have theosis. And then you see the Gnostics, they're taking the more mystical temple rituals. You see, if you know about what happens in the temple, you will recognize that it is in the Gnostic Gospels, right? There are various Gnostic sects who did baptism for the dead, like 1 Corinthians 15 mentions, and like we do to this day. And that does answer a big question that people have for Christians. Like, what if there's some kid in Africa that never got to hear about Jesus Christ? And is he just going to burn in hell? The answer is no, because a good and righteous God would not do that. He gives everybody a fair and equal chance to go to the level which they choose, right? He's not punishing them for their sins, but their sins are what keep them from being on the higher level like God, right? So we choose which degree of glory, which again in 1 Corinthians 15 mentions that in the resurrection, there will be 3 different types of bodies. One that has the glory of the sun, a celestial body, one that has the glory of the moon, a terrestrial body, and one that is only named in the Doctrine and Covenants, but has the glory of the stars. We believe this, we teach this, and it is in the Bible.
One of the
Yeah,
things
that's really good.
you mentioned earlier, Draco, about you said neurotic, what was it? Neurotic anxiety. Was that right? Like sometimes
intergenerational anxiety, that kind of thing.
intergenerational anxiety. So I was thinking about that because of this idea of karma and past life karma, because we talked a little bit about the Gnostic and the Kabbalistic, the Hebrew idea of reincarnation, and that your soul's going through, or you've got like 613 parts of yourself, which make up parts of your soul, to go no more
out. And so that's constantly in the Book of Mormon. So we have to understand, why does it say after you die, you will no longer go out? So it seems to imply multiple goings out from this pre-eternal realm.
And I don't think it's interesting to me, because I think 150 years ago, Joseph Smith would have been friends with Alex Jones, and he probably would have been super into karma, like in these Eastern ideas. I think it's interesting though. Today, you talk to a lot of Westerners in general, and they don't really understand karma. They think it's like, again, intention. You try to be good, and then good things come to you. It's like, that's not really right. If you pull a butterfly out of the mud trying to save its life, you might break its wings off. Like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. We have to understand how things affect things. But that intergenerational anxiety, that seems pretty real. And you have to imagine, again, with the Spinoza effect, because a lot of the time, like, I know we didn't really deal with atheism, and we'll talk about that another time. But I remember earlier this year, Elon Musk was interviewed by, I think, the Babylon Bee. And he said, they asked him, do you believe in God? And he said, I believe in Spinoza's God, which is a quote from Einstein, because Einstein was talking to a rabbi at one point, and he said he believed in Spinoza's God. Spinoza's God, Einstein. It was a pretty good quote. It's like, the God who reveals himself in the lawful harmony of the world, not in a God who concerns himself with the fate and doings of mankind. And he got a lot of flack for that. And I think people called him an atheist over it. But he really wasn't, actually. That's not an atheistic thing to say. It has to do with free will. It has to do with your own self-accountability, and it has to do with your own self-ascension, like the product of you have been given a game board that works a certain way, and you know what to do. You didn't have to know, but there's also mechanisms that you can use. It's not really to punish you, because it's really to benefit the universe that you do this. And a big part of that, again, is the effects thing. Like, if we're able to stop the effects of negative karma, I think that's a big part of this whole baptism of the dead thing. If you're in Africa for the last 1,000 years or last few hundred years, you know, you've been dealing with intergenerational anxiety. There might be something to stopping that flow of intergenerational anxiety through washing it clean, right? And there's a spiritual level, but there's a physical level too. And if you're connected with that, but like, the only reason you're doing this is because you're connected. We're connected still in some way. Like, that person still matters. It's still affecting us. You remember them, or they're in your heart, or they're in your wallet, or like they said things that memed, right? And like, your kids are still using those expressions. So there's such a practical level to this, where we really have to stop the negative flow, and we have this opportunity to do certain things which will make life static and stasis enough that we can choose where we go from there.
That's like the, kind of like a theurgical, Kabbalistic connection with Mormonism as well, because, you see in Kabbalah and also in theurgy, like the idea of, repairing the world, or engaging with, like, creating, co-creation with God, or repairing the world and things like that. And, like a Neoplatonist like Iamblichus or the Hermeticist would do this through, magic rituals and such. With Mormons would do this through temple ordinances, baptism for the dead. Traditional Kabbalism does this through strict adherence to Torah law. But, there's this idea that you can really, by interacting, by doing physical things and engaging in practice, like, you can really do these things. And by working in the physical world, you can ascend up through, like, all of those levels. And that's something that, like, mainstream religion really doesn't have. And that's one of those things that, that's coded into, like, the, into the origins of Mormon thought, and Mormon cosmology is centered around that. And so I think that's one of the things that makes it interesting to people who aren't, from that background. There's this Kabbalistic, Hermetic, traditional,
self-starter,
kind of, worldview that's really interesting. It's Smith's cosmology is very Baroque and beautiful, and it's really fascinating, like, even from a non-Mormon's perspective, in my opinion.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because when we talk about this restoration of all things, I think it's the restoration of the priesthood authority. Some more independent Mormons would think it's the restoration of the knowledge, right? But it is a prophesied thing in Jewish tradition that there will be a restoration of all things. And throughout the Old Testament, there are promises that the tribe of Joseph will get a promised land, his land of inheritance that's separate from Judah. And then in Ezekiel, right, there's also, before we get to Ezekiel, there is the fact that in Jewish tradition, there's this belief of a restoration of all things, and that the tribe of Joseph will be involved in it. And I think the most pertinent example of this is this in Ezekiel 37, verses 16 to 19. It talks about how God is commanding to take one stick to write on it. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's a mouthful. One stick to write on it for Judah, and one stick to write on it for Joseph. Right? It's talking about how these sticks will be used to gather Israel in the last days, right? So a stick in that context, what it could mean is like a scribe, like you're rolling a scribe, like a scripture. That's how we interpret it. We say that this is a prophecy about the Book of Mormon, that the stick of Judah is the Bible. It is the record of the Jews. The stick of Joseph is the Book of Mormon.
Dude, that blows my mind. I never thought about that. Oh, you're blowing my mind right now. Where's a picture of that? Chinese scroll. Because I've seen a library once that was just incredible, and all it was just stacks like Jenga of scrolls, and they were just like, instead of in a library of shelves, they were stacked on top of each other back and forth, and you have to pull one out like Jenga and put it back and leave the tube. But that's literally their sticks that you pull out the tube, and that's what do you call that? Like on Jewish Torah scroll on door. What's that thing called? The mezuzah, dude. Yeah. A mezuzah. It's the scroll and a stick. Oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of
Yeah,
that.
and so that is what it claims to be. Is it, Joseph is said to get his own promised land. It says that America in the Book of Mormon is Joseph's promised land. It says that it is the stick of Joseph, right, in the hand of Ephraim, because it is the tribe of Ephraim and Manasseh that both together went to the Americas. And you have that prophecy that's for the gathering of Israel. The Book of Mormon at the very beginning, it says this is a testament to the Jews and the Gentiles that Jesus is the Christ, the eternal God, Jehovah, manifesting in the flesh. And you know what? Why would that be a specific thing for the Jews? Because why do the Jews not believe Jesus is the Christ? Because of these Deuteronomist reforms that happened. Because right after they removed the Holy One of Israel as the Messiah, after they removed Jehovah as the Messiah who will descend down from heaven, what happens? They get into Babylonian captivity. They develop a political Messiah who will liberate them from their enemies, right? So when Jesus Christ comes, not everyone recognizes him. Not everyone remembers those old traditions. But there are certainly people who, as soon as Jesus Christ shows up, says, you are the Messiah. You are the Son of God, which completely contrasts what the other Jews believe at that time period. And then we have the Book of Mormon,
Right.
which is prophesied to gather Israel, which is showing that until this time period, they believed that Jehovah, the Son of God, was going to descend down, right? So that's an interesting thing. And someone in the chat said, what does Mormonism think of Elijah? We think that Elijah, he came back. He restored certain things. He restored baptism for the dead, which is what it means when it says he will turn the hearts of the children to their fathers and the hearts of the fathers to their children. That baptism for the dead we were just talking about. And that Elijah himself appeared in the temple to Joseph Smith. In the Doctrine and Covenants, there are various accounts of heavenly beings appearing in the temples, angels, Jehovah himself, all these temple visions. It's all throughout the doctrine.
Yeah, basically Latter-day Saints just have way more, and it's way more intense. It's like kind of like Catholicism 500 years ago. And I mean, things like not John the Baptist, John
the Revelator, how he's still alive.
John the Revelator is still alive. Yeah, you'll get to hear that when you're 6. They'll tell you that. So
yeah,
it's kind of cool.
You want to hear my theory?
Yeah.
So John the Revelator. Okay, so he's the one doing revelations. I think that he is going to be one of the 2 witnesses. Here's why. Because when the Bible was first compiled, they didn't have like chapters. It was all just one text, right? Revelations chapter 10 ends with John being told that you will prophesy again before many nations. Now, the footnote in the Mormon text of it, where they sort of describe it, says that it's him participating in the revelation, in the restoration, because he restored the Melchizedek priesthood along with the spirits of Peter and James. So Peter, James, and John restore the priesthood to Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith. I believe that he is going to be one of the 2 witnesses, because immediately after he's told, you will prophesy again before many nations, it goes in and says, I will give power unto my 2 witnesses that they will prophesy for such and such days. Immediately, chapter 11 begins with the 2 witnesses. John was promised. So it's sort of subtle in the Bible, where there's a passage that talks about how he will tarry, and then it's explicit in the Book of Mormon, not the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, that John was allowed to live and continue preaching the gospel, right, until Jesus Christ comes. And that goes back to that prophecy that people say was never fulfilled. That means it's false, where this generation will not pass away until I come. Well, there's still someone from this generation that's still alive on the earth, John the Revelator, who is said to prophesy again before many nations. And then immediately after he's told that, it says that the 2 witnesses will show up, will prophesy, will try and convert as many of the Jews and the Gentiles or whatever as possible. Then they will be killed, holding off an army, and all that crazy stuff that's in Revelations. I believe that one of them is John the Revelator, right? It could be some modern day person. It could be one of the 3 Nephites from the Book of Mormon who also were allowed to tarry, representing the stick of Judah and the stick of Joseph. It could be someone who's like newly ordained to be a prophet for this specific reason, connecting the old world to the new world.
It'll be the next, whichever prophet lives to be 350 or something like that. Once you beat
there's a lot of possibilities, but I think that John the Revelator as one of the 3 witnesses makes so much sense. John the Revelator is John the beloved apostle who wrote the Gospels of John, who wrote the book of Revelations. He's called the Revelator because he had the great vision. And most Christians think he's dead, but his death is never recorded historically or in the Bible. And from the Doctrine and Covenants, we know that he is alive.
So that goes to the Bodhisattva ideal. And so the thought is, so in the Book of Mormon, when Jesus comes to North America or this hemisphere, whatever your theory is, he comes to the Nephites, and he has some Nephites that say, and he asks them, what do you desire? And he says, we desire to be you in the eternal realms. And he says, this is a good desire. What do you desire? And they're afraid to talk. And he said, I already know your thoughts. I already know what you desire. And it's a good desire because what they desired was to remain on the earth and continue spreading the good news as long as they possibly could. And so it seems that this was the same desire that John had, because once Jesus confirmed that this was the three Nephites' desire, he said, you will tarry here until your work is done, and your desire is higher than those who just want to escape and be with me, even though that's a good desire. Your desire is even higher.
I really like that because it ties in Taoistic things with so many other things you guys are bringing up. Because one of the points of like getting over ego loss and whatever is to let go of your desires. And oh gosh, there were so many things that were so good here that you guys are talking about. Someone else was gonna, I think Chad was gonna come in again. You say something.
Oh, right.
And then
so
tie it
with the
up.
three Nephites, it's really interesting because throughout the church history, we have folklore and legends of people who supposedly claim, oh, they met one of them and they were told about it. I've actually met multiple people who, with witnesses around them, claim that stuff happened. Some of them say that like they could both see that person, like a shared hallucination, if you want to call it that, but other people around them couldn't, and that they were later told that that was one of the three Nephites. So sort of that idea of the veil, how they're like translated beings like Elijah who are still roaming the earth, acting as like living angels on the earth. And you see all these folklore about the three Nephites protecting the temple or whatever, like where these men show up in armor and nobody knows where they came from. All these weird stories. It's just really interesting, the folklore around it. And then you hear about like supposedly immortal people, and it's like that could be John the Revelator, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of way, because I have a three Nephite story in my family line as well, and it could be interpreted very mystically. I actually put it in my book kind of in a mystical way. But what I was going to go for is probably going to tie back in the intergenerational anxiety ideas, because if we're talking about kind of fulfilling these things, and the three Nephites, or John the Revelator, they wanted to stay and continue their work. But that's not really a physical thing that happens on earth. They died, but it's more likely, like I was saying earlier, like my grandpa in the temple with our ancestor, we're all the same person, and God is outside of time. And if we are gods, then we are outside of time too. And that's how we can all access each other in time. Now it's kind of this dualistic thing. So John the Revelator and the three Nephites, they might still be here through DNA. And you guys are talking about the stick of Judah and Joseph, but there's something else important in there. And it's, like I said, I said earlier, I'm just coming back from my atheism, though I haven't read the scriptures for a while. But I remember there was something else pretty important, that a lot of this will come up out of like the root of the stem of Jesse or something. And that is very important because through DNA, Mormons very much like their family, whatever you call it, family history work, ancestry work. Many people, I know I'm not alone, but I have, and I can literally take it back through. It's mapped, and I've now had my actual blood work done, and it even maps through places through France. Like exactly, it's crazy. That we may descend. I can go back to the stem of Jesse and David and Solomon, and if Christ, was married, had kids, his daughter may have, married a French king ancestor of mine, and many of ours, because that's how DNA works. But that stem that's supposed to bring up the sticks or the staffs of Judah and Joseph, they're literally, that's the intergenerational anxiety working through thousands of years. And there's a lot of it, you've made me want to say dimethyltryptamine's a hell of a drug a lot of times tonight, because part of you're supposed to have the mystical experience to go through that. And DMT is nothing but that. And it's ubiquitous. It's in us. It's in trees. We've had access to it forever. And something DMT teaches you about time is every day is 4 other days at once. And there's a leeway of give or take because we messed it up with leap year and stuff. But every day is 4 other days, and it could be from 1,000 years ago. It could be from 100,000 years ago. It could be from 10 years ago. But yeah, that all concresses to one flat point where there's no time because we are gods.
And if
that's
you
the
like
wisdom we have to realize.
DMT, then you should really try a little LDS. You know?
I'm supposed to have some in like 10 minutes, so maybe.
Yeah, and
They-
from my point of view, I almost view like the DMT. It's like I definitely think the stuff when you take DMT, it's real. I think that it does let you see through the veil, like Alex Jones talking about people seeing interdimensional demons doing that stuff, right? And I also think that like through your own elevation, you can also have those sort of visions. I think that that's absolutely how it happens. But I was going to ask, what is the 3 Nephite story that you have in your family?
Let's see if I can remember it exactly. My great grandfather, he came here from Greece, and his wife, he was a cook. I can't remember where they lived. They might have been here in Utah, and my grandma's sister was still in Florida. Anyway, my grandma was very, very sick, and they lived in this complex apartment building where like you just had to really weave back, and they were in the very back. It was hard to find them, kind of thing. That's how the story goes. But my grandma, she just couldn't be taken care of because a very poor situation. It was during the Great Depression. My grandpa he couldn't miss work, or he'd get taken over and they'd not survive. So he left her home very ill, state of whatever, and she heard a knock at the door, and she's calls come in, and part of it was, I think, my younger grandmother was out, or no, my grandfather was out front playing too, and there's like no record of them seeing the guy come through. But he comes through and he gives my grandma a blessing, and shortly thereafter she gets better. And I think if I remember right, and again, this is in my book, people can read it. The gentleman told her that he was sent by her sister Anne, and I found that very interesting. And part of the story is, when because this was back the Great Depression, she had to write a letter or wait until they met again because they lived in different states. And so she said to her sister later on, thank you, because she just figured originally that it was a missionary, like, oh, my sister let the elders know that I was unwell and sent me to get a blessing. So the next time she sees her sister, she says, hey, thank you for alerting the elders and the local mission, whatever, to send him over to give me that blessing. And her sister was like, what are you talking about? I didn't send anyone. I did say a prayer, though, that you would be taken care of. And so through some sort of action of that prayer taking place across vast geographical distance, at the same time, sort of allegedly, something came out and healed my grandmother. Whether it was a 3rd Nephite, my grandpa, he actually said in his autobiography about it, he asked his mom, why do you think it was one of the 3 Nephites as opposed to John the Revelator? And she said that's just what she knew once it all came together for her. So it's kind of loosely how the story goes.
Yeah,
nice.
There's definitely things that I've been told that they aren't my stories to tell that I 100% believe because there's witnesses. But I will share a crazy story I've had. So I've had things like voice in my head speaking to me, telling me to forgive a specific person that I think moved away years ago, and then I run into them like 2 minutes later, right? Crazy stuff. But when I was really investigating this stuff, I saw a video from Glenn Beck. It's pinned on my Instagram page. You can find Latter Day Chat on Instagram if you want to watch it. But basically, to summarize, he has a dream, and the dream is basically a warning. I would call it, in my own words, a warning about secret combinations, a warning about spiritual discernment. He brought this up when the Balenciaga stuff was happening, where the Balenciaga company was putting all the satanic stuff in their ads. That's when he's talking about this in relation to it. So he has this dream. It's in a time in his life where he can have no dreams possible. That pinned one in the middle right there. It's a video like 10 minutes long, so I don't know if you'd want to do it on here. But then he goes back to no dreams. Then he is called by a very prominent church figure from that time. It was like 10 years ago, to go and meet them, right? So he agrees to meet them. Glenn Beck is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, if you don't know. So he goes back, and then when he's on his way to go meet them, he has that same exact dream again, right? Same exact like satanic warnings, warning about Satan, warning about secret combination type stuff. And then he's like freaking out because in his time, because of his illness that he has not been able to have dreams. In the entire 10 years, he's only had 2 dreams, the same dream. And so when he shows up to the guy's house, the guy just immediately brings up that dream to him. It's like, God speaks to us through dreams sometimes and visions, right? And you know what I mean when I'm saying this. And it's like, yeah. It's like, don't forget that. All right. That's all I wanted to say. So he knew what the dream was. And I see this while I'm investigating these things. I guess you could say, awakening to our awful situation in the world. It's like, was that like, because he's not very specific in the video. He's not like, right? But was that someone like associated with Mormonism? So I asked God that night to reveal these things to me. And I have a dream, which I'll describe in a minute. But in that dream, someone who is now deceased, who was an apostle of the church, higher up, a well-known person who is on record claiming to have seen the resurrected Jesus Christ, right? That he is someone who's claims that he's met Jesus Christ. He said that in talks. And this person appears to me in the dream. So I see all this stuff in the dream, a lot of warnings and stuff. And then this man appears to me wearing all white clothing. And he starts warning me about the devil and describing how the devil isn't what we expect, right? And he shows me Satan and, just like a man with like long blonde hair, but he almost looks like a child and a man at the same time. It was weird, but he was very pretty, I guess you could say, like a beautiful, like he's described, like a handsome man. No homo.
Like Griffith? Is that what you're saying? Like Griffith?
Yeah, Griffith.
Yeah, like a very glorious person. He looks like Dio from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. That's the only way I can describe what I saw. Anyways, so then I wake up after receiving this warning from an apostle who I haven't thought of in years, because I grew up around the LDS stuff. I always thought it was kind of crap, but I didn't hate it. I just thought it was lame, and I didn't. So I find out over a year, I keep running into people like 4 or 5 times, some of them following my Instagram page, who are like, oh yeah, I know Glenn Beck in real life. And I've been able to verify with multiple people who exactly it was they met with. And it was the man that I saw in that dream who appeared to me after I inquired of the Lord the next night. The same person, coincidentally, after I see that video, that's sort of a trigger for me. That is not a coincidence, all right?
No way.
That's not a coincidence that that's the same person who is warning essentially about these secret combinations and saying that is a warning from God. And what I was told from multiple people is like, this isn't like public information. The person isn't even, alive anymore. They passed away, but who knows? Maybe nobody else within the church even knew about this stuff, right? Because I think everyone has agency. I think that, there are the priesthood keys on earth that, allow you to receive more revelation than the average person would. I also think that not all prophets are built equally, right? They have the potential, but they also have their agency. But that
so you think these buttoned up guys hold the secret of the universe right now?
I don't know. It depends on the person. From what I have been told, what I think is that right now Jesus Christ is coming soon. I think that right now the world is more wicked than it has ever been, and it's wicked enough, it's ripe for judgment, and that right now people need to repent, and that is the only thing stopping Jesus Christ from coming. We've got a spectrum. So on one hand, we have God, who wants people to repent, who wants people to come unto him and be forgiven of their sins. And then on the other hand, you have the increasing wickedness of the world, and that at some point it's going to reach a point where there is no choice but to send Jesus Christ. And as I've said, I don't think all people who are given authority, because I've made it clear, I think that spiritual gifts, I think manifestation is something completely different from priesthood authority. I think priesthood authority is the authority to make covenants with God and to act in his name. I think manifestation is our natural intelligence power of our consciousness, that we can warp reality, that we can affect reality. And I think that right now we are just in a place where the only thing we can do is repent and try to be better, because Jesus Christ is coming. Right?
Yeah,
I don't know if we're at a dangerous
we're at a dangerous point because like you think about Joseph. I have a lot of friends who are like part of like the Doctrine of Christ movement, or I've met Bickertonites through Ward Radio, and I'm and I know Alice Cooper, and he's his father was a Bickertonite who was supposed to be like a prophet of their church, right?
No way.
Yeah,
That's crazy. What?
Vincent Bernier. Yeah. So like of all the people that are associated, it's pretty crazy. But the main thing is that there are so many versions of Mormonism that are not part of the intellectual reserve. Intellectual reserve, for people who don't know, is the corporation that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints owns or is a part of, or however this works, that owns all of the corporate symbols, trademarks, and registered patents or whatever of the church. So there is like a corporation, and we've gotten to a point where that corporation, we think of it as this is the living testimony of the apostles, but there's so much more to it than that. And I'm worried. I mean, I think it's important. I think it's really important. Like, it's important because the idea is very important to people that we have a living legacy, but that's what keeps the unification of the different sects from happening, because there are groups that have arguments about what happened 100 years ago, not about what's happening now. They're worried about what happened during Brigham Young, or Joseph Smith III, or but these are antiquated ideas, and they've been antiquated, like the polygamy issue, the 1890s ban. So it's been more than 100 years. So at some point, like I was thinking about like Joseph Fielding Smith and Joseph Smith III. So the son of Joseph Smith, who is the Reorganized Church's leader, and the nephew of Joseph Smith, who's the cousin of the son of Joseph Smith. He's in charge of the Utah church, and they hang out. They meet at one point, and they have this huge. And I'm thinking this is the most important meeting in history in this weird way. I mean, there's all these really important things that have happened, but if you think about it, this is the thing that could have. One church has already banned they got the priesthood ban over. Like the RDLS have. They're letting African Americans and persons of color in the priesthood at this point. And the other church is no longer doing polygamy, which was the big argument. And that could have been the moment, right, where the churches like married each other again. But because we didn't do that, I think that we have to look at that and consider the consequences. And the consequences are people will often focus on whether or not they're eligible for their temple recommend granted, this isn't as bad as like it's made out to be, but it's made out that you're worried about your eligibility for a community award instead of about what it should be, which is the endowment of power. I think the endowment of power is something that I just want everyone to know what it is. Because if you've ever seen like, I haven't met Glenn Beck, but I know like Quarter Black Garrett, who works on the Blaze and does Normal World and things like that. So I also know a bunch, like if you've ever seen like a Secret Service agent, like LDS dude who, commands in using the endowment of power for someone who's been shot not to die or something like that. I mean, crazy things happen. And I don't want us to forget about that, because that's really a big part of it. It's like you're using yourself to, perform miracles for God.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I know like a lot of like the Doctrine of Christ people, their belief is sort of that the Aaronic priesthood is still on the earth, but the higher priesthood isn't. My viewpoint isn't quite that. I believe that the keys allow certain people to unlock the power, but it is up to their agency to do it. And that the keys, even if you haven't unlocked the power, can still be passed along. Like if you've seen My Hero Academia, like how they pass along one for all or whatever, right? That's my viewpoint. That's what I've specifically been told by somebody who does claim to have had second comforter experiences, angelic visitations with witnesses present where they both see it. And that's who I actually got the Melchizedek priesthood from. And that's basically what he told me, is that not everyone who gets this can actually use it. You actually have to learn to do it, right? You have to, it's like a muscle. You have to practice it. Many are called, but few are chosen, right? And so that's sort of my viewpoint. Even like with figureheads in the church, like sure, they might have potential for the keys, but they don't necessarily. And it's funny that you show up Yoda, because at worst, that's what I could see happening with the church, where I a lot of people like Quick Media, he talks a lot about like how the corporate church is sort of influencing the religious church more and more, and that's a negative thing with these sort of neo-Marxist ideas, where very clearly Marxism is specifically stated to be the ideology of Satan in our religion, right? Right. So we see that stuff happening, and I sort of compare it to the Star Wars prequels, where there's the Jedi Council, and there's like Palpatine who's in the Senate, and he's infiltrating things and influencing things, and they're, you know, the Jedi, they're not evil people by any means, but they're kind of blind to this stuff that's going on because they're distracted by the bureaucracy and stuff, and because that maybe their spiritual discernment isn't much. That's why I see happening in the church at large, right, in general. And that's why I think this idea of visionary men and Isaiah and learning to trust the Spirit, like when you read the Book of Mormon, right now we're supposed to read the Book of Mormon. Come follow me. We should read it. And I want anyone who reads the Book of Mormon after this point, who's listening to this, I want you to read it from the viewpoint of the Deuteronomist reforms and preserving that ideology, not just of the Son of God, but of the visionary men, of personal revelation, because everything in the Book of Mormon is temple symbolism, right? If you can, I want you to look up a picture right quick. Look up Kabbalah Tree of Life Apostles on Google.
Oh yeah, that was the one off your Instagram, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I have one on Instagram. I just want to explain. So in the Book of Nephi, this is one thing that's noted about it wouldn't be that picture. It would be like just like Apostle Tree of Life. Or yeah, it is on my Instagram. But in Nephi's vision, there's the Tree of Life, which is compared to the Virgin Mary. That's most notable because in that ancient First Temple Judaism, the wife of God Most High and the mother of Jehovah was symbolized by a tree of life, which King Josiah throws out of the temple, right? This is also a symbol of the condescension. It's sort of a double symbol, right? And we see God the Father sending his son down, condescending, and that the different points on the Kabbalah Tree of Life represent the 12 apostles. And that's worth noting because in the vision, when Nephi sees Jesus Christ descending out of the heavens, he sees 12 other divine beings following him, the 12 apostles, blurring the line between humanity and divinity, where they are incarnations of these lesser divine beings who are following Christ into mortality, right? And that's something that the LDS emphasizes. We believe that a lot of the major prophets were incarnations of major angels, the most notable being Adam, right? Adam is explicitly stated to be the archangel Michael incarnated. And if you look at the name Michael, Mikael in Hebrew, it means he who is like God, or he who is in the likeness of God. So literally, Adam, this means man, but the name Michael means basically he who is made in God's image, right? So Michael being incarnated as Adam, I believe that that's sort of what the New Age idea of higher selves come from, which is your pre-mortal self, your spiritual self aligned with the Holy Spirit. And that, like, for example, you could say that Adam's higher self is Michael, right? It's very interesting that the Book of Mormon is just full of that symbolism. I would recommend, if anyone here doesn't have a Book of Mormon, if you want another copy, this is the Book of Mormon. If I was sharing it to someone, let's like, look at all this cool conspiracy stuff, I would give them the annotated Book of Mormon. It's from Book of Mormon Evidence. You can find it on Amazon. It has all sorts of evidence and all this cool stuff in it and really analyzes. It's like $50, but anyone who has the money, who's read the Book of Mormon, that, yeah, I'll just drop $50 on it, I'd recommend it. Anyone who wants to read the Book of Mormon from the first time, absolutely, I would recommend that.
Dude, there's the Yale Skousen edition you can get, like, which is like the original print of it. I think I'm trying to look around and figure out where it is because I have one somewhere. But
I can get mine. But who is Joseph Smith? Was he an archangel?
That is a theory that people have because we know that Gabriel is Noah, Michael is Adam. We don't know the rest. A lot of people think that Enoch was Raphael, but in the Book of Enoch, he becomes his own archangel. He becomes Metatron, which still has that sort of theosis, higher self thing, where it's funny because, you know, the Temple Endowment, they talk about, Masonic handshakes, but literally in the Book of Enoch, there is a passage where it grasps the hand of Michael.
I love the way the Skousen edition feels, that nice, soft, it feels nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
So he shakes the hand of Archangel Michael, who we know to be Adam, and then he eventually becomes an archangel himself, mirroring the temple endowment. Right? Isaiah even talks about shake the hand so that you may enter the gate of the nobles. Right? It's all really interesting how it all comes together.
And another interesting thing you brought up, the 12 apostles is kind of being like a tree of life there, as like, you know, we got the apostles as like the Sephiroth. The earliest, like, you know, Kabbalistic text that we have, like before the Zohar, we don't have like, you know, a 10 Sephiroth system. You actually have like a 13 Sephiroth system. And so, you know, like that's interesting as well, because the same thing, you got 12
especially because
apostles and then Christ. And, you know, so like, instead of like, you know, 10 Sephiroth, there's 13 initially. And so if you're going off the idea that like the Kabbalah that we know, the tree of life that we know, is this kind that's like you know, revealed to the world and explained in medieval times, but it is going off these earlier traditions. And so like, you know, in the earliest traditions that we have, yeah, there's 13 Sephiroth actually. So that's interesting that you brought up the 12 apostles in connection with that.
Yeah, and we see Jesus Christ in the center as the 13th, and then we see
Yeah,
the 12 apostles all
Tifereth
around
on the
him.
tree of life is usually associated with Christ right there in the, you know, the center. It's like the balance between Geburah and Chesed. So like, you know, judgment, wrath, you know, anger, you know, and then mercy on the other side. Like, you know, both are balanced in like the figure of Christ.
This person says, I might be mistaken, but don't Mormons think the second Christ will be out of the USA? I think he means the second coming. We believe that the second coming will be in Jerusalem, that Jesus Christ will come down on the Mount Olives after the 2 witnesses are slain and split the mount in 2 and appear to the Jews and save them from their enemies or something like that, because the whole world will be turned against Jerusalem.
That's one theory.
Yeah.
And so you were talking about that we need to repent individually. But I think one of the main messages of the Book of Mormon is that we need to repent as a community whole. And so we need to create Zion. So that's, in my opinion, what's keeping Jesus from returning, whatever interpretation that is. The light of Christ is we haven't accomplished creating a people of one heart and one mind with no poor among us yet. We could say all day long, the LDS like to claim, the Utah Corporation likes to claim like, well, our church is the literal kingdom of God. It's like, well, the kingdom of God's within and without us. It's about us. And so we need to manifest
that. Landing pad. We haven't built the landing pad for the rocket ships yet. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, one thing I'd say, like, Revelation seems to imply that the world gets worse, right? Like it gets more evil. But I think
I'm not saying the world at large. I would hope that would ultimately. What percentage of the world population do you need to have working on the same page for you to have systemic change? You know, 14%. You know.
Well, I'm not really sure about that. Like, all we know is like the Constitution will hang by a thread. That's the White Horse prophecy with Joseph Smith. We know all this stuff. We don't know for sure, but I do think, because it says there are but 2 churches, the Church of God and the Church of the Devil, and a lot of people will interpret that as being like, oh, anyone outside my specific denomination is wrong. I think it is reflective larger of the divide we see happening in society at large, where people of different religious ideas, different groups are going to one side, right? And on the other side, we have this new cultural religion, this new cultural Marxism religion, right? That we see manifesting in academia, where it's about oppressor versus oppression, which is something that the Antichrist in the Book of Mormon preaches. Korihor, he specifically teaches that same ideology years before Marx came, right? So I see that as being the 2 churches that even atheists subconsciously agree with our ideas, because these are the 2 same ideas that we see in the war in heaven. And I think that that is the divide that we are going to see, the 2 churches, and that perhaps Zion, I don't think necessarily anything will be what we're expecting, though I do think that God wants us to progress as much as we can, have as many people saved, but there will come a time when there is too much in the world that is evil, right? We see the United Nations trying to legalize pedophilia. We see in states like Washington and California, where if you don't allow your child to get gender transitioning surgery, the state will take them away, right? So when this new central bank digital currency rolls in, do you think that you will have a choice on these things? No. Essentially, if you don't worship the beast, you will not be able to buy or sell, which is, I think, what happens before Jesus Christ comes. Whether Zion will be established before or after, I'm not really sure on that. I think in some ways it will be, because us, the people, in response to that adversity, there needs to be opposition to all things. We will unite around our common ideas of good.
I was like, yeah, you're not an advocate for just letting it happen because you're over here doing the action to spread the news and to spread the awareness and everything. So I'm not saying, yeah, that's good. That's a good approach.
That's interesting though, eschatologically. Like, you wonder, is it a destiny that the world ends? I don't know. I mean, this idea that like there's
So the idea of like a new heaven and a new earth, like it kind of sounds similar to like the polar shifts, and there seems to be something that happens whenever the polar shifts happen. Whenever it comes to a renewing of the earth, there seems to be cataclysmic events, whether it's a solar flare or whatever. And so you see the joke wherever it's like it starts out with sun worshippers, and then they develop AI, and then they build the Tower of Babel, and then the sun has a solar flare, knocks out all their technology, and they're back to worshiping the sun again. I think something like that happens, and then each time the cycle is happening, we're harvesting new celestialized beings that are, or bodhisattvas or enlightened beings that we're able to understand to the degree where they graduated from this sphere of existence.
That's interesting. All right, well, we're 3 hours deep. Do you guys want to like any last thoughts that you have that you want to close on? I thought Draco, you had some thought. You look like you had like were you just smirking? Were you just smirking there?
I mean, maybe just some like sly. I don't remember all of them, but like someone said, like, what's the percentage? I mean, statistically, to move that, it's 51%. You have to go. I mean, it has to move past the divide in order for the things like Andres was saying, like forever ago. We got to be plastic about it, the neuroplasticity, and it has to go past the 51% threshold in order for things to mold differently, and for us to reach that eternal progressive point of paradise. I don't know.
Do you think that the world has to go through like maybe we'll stand knee deep in blood, but maybe we'll like it? Like, what do you think? Is it going to be super bad before it gets better?
I think it'll get better the millennium, Like there's 1,000 years promised after Jesus Christ comes, and then there is the true final conflict.
Yeah, that'll be good. We agree on that, but I wanted to hear if do you think do you feel like we're headed towards apocalypse before 1,000-year millennium of peace? Is there going to be like how bad's it going to be? What do you think?
The limits of your language mean the limits of your world. So however bad you think something bad is how bad it's going to be. And otherwise you just get through the world. So like, yeah, sure, it's probably going to be hellacious, but if you know how to maneuver, maybe it won't be so bad. I don't know. We can go a lot of ways with that.
What do they say about the United States? We're a land of extremes, right? We have the smartest people and we have the dumbest people. I think as things get worse, we're going to see a lot of things get a lot better too. And that's my hope.
Yeah.
Epic. All right, well, guys, that was super awesome. I appreciate that we did this. I have one last thought, which is like Darth Jar Jar is real, but probably Darth Jar Jar is there's two ways it could go. Like Jar Jar is definitely evil, but it could just be that he's a social justice warrior who doesn't know what he's doing and ineffectually leads the world to the universe to social Marxism and chaos and peril. And I don't know, but that's one way. The other way is he literally is a master of drunken boxing. Okay. I'm glad we're clear on that. Christopher Dracosophos. Did I say that right? Ever? Dracosophos?
Dracosophos. It's whatever.
Dracosophos. All right. Dracosophos. All right, I did it. All right. So this is his YouTube page, which is soon going to have episodes of Hidden Mana. It's like, it's this, you know what I'm talking about? Remember that thing from earlier?
Mm-hmm.
In Mana. So like, make sure you check out Christopher Dracosophos. Narayana is source.
Yeah.
And Latter Day Chad's awesome. You should definitely check out Latter Day Chad's Instagram page, dude. You got some cool memes here. You're doing it. You're a Latter Day Chad, bro. What's up?
And one thing I think that would be a good note to leave off on is like, it's interesting because we have different perspectives here. But regardless, the things that Joseph Smith accomplished, even if you're just looking at like a work of fiction, it's miraculous that any of that was even possible and unexplainable. Like some people say he was an arcane Mormon wizard. Other people will say that he was a con artist. I say he was exactly what he claimed to be. He was a prophet, right? I think that he was a prophet like Moses in the modern day. He once said, Noah came before the flood. I have come before the fire.
The question is, what is that fire exactly?
Right. It could be one of those Sita fire, baptism of fire. I think is like
That's true. I think it sounds cooler if he's like talking about the apocalypse though, but baptism.
Y'all gotta check out Gnostic Mormon Mystic because he's got some epic memes going on. They've got some. Look at this one. This is beautiful. This is one of my favorite memes. I love this one. So definitely check out Gnostic Mormon Mystic. Like, oh, this is also really good too. That's cool. But you've seen. Oh, look at that. That's cool. I haven't even seen this part yet. Wait, that was there somewhere. There you go. One there. Oh, the point is, Gnostic Mormon Mystic is making it real. Look at that. That's so cool. That's where it belongs. It belongs on Instagram. This is practical. I like a lot of these. Really, there's some really great AI art here. Celestial Saint posting going on from like the right vibe and perspective. You'll love this stuff. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Cool. And Mercurius, do you want me to share anything or?
Yeah, sure. You can just pull up my Instagram page. It's the same as like, my name on here.
Can you post something so I can find you really quickly?
Yeah, there should be 2 posts on there.
Oh, let me just like type at Mercurius.
It's in that group chat too.
Yeah. I'm in the podcast discussion group.
Mercurius.
Shows Jesus on the crucifix on his profile.
Just post something real quick. Sorry.
I just sent like a letter. I just sent a message to the. Yeah,
there you go. Sweet. Yeah. Okay. Boom. Check this out. Mercurius Scotus right here. What's this?
Yeah, that's the Arbitel. It's a kind of it's a magic grimoire that surfaced in Calvinist Switzerland. So it's got some influence from like Renaissance Hermeticism, Kabbalah.
It says Andreas right on it. See, I gotta look at that. I'm gonna look into this more later. We'll talk about that pretty soon. We'll have to do something again soon. We can do something on these specific subjects more. That was a fun overhaul, but let's definitely get it a little deeper. This is great. Thanks for sharing that. Awesome, man. Sure. Well, all right. We'll see you guys next time. Peace out.
Talk later. Bye.